It was a genius move in hindsight. There weren't any bells and whistles. The Antichrist came to Earth in the form of a B-list Christian country music singer named Billy Beal. He had dark black hair, curly and chin length. He was built like an ox, tall 6.5 feet, and well over 250 pounds. The kind of guy you wanted on your side in a barroom ball. When I entered his inner circle months later, Billy told me his stage name was a combination of Belial and Basil Bub. What does it mean? He smiled this trademark deceiver smile. Then in his plucky country twang answered, "The vile lord of dung." The scariest part of everything was how big of a joke all of it was to him. His mission was to create hell on earth and bring a population of 7.5 billion people under his dominion. He laughed about it often. His indifference was the part that scared me the most. I first met Billy in August of 2019. At the time, I worked with my mentor in the Christian music industry, a guy named Corey Sims. Corey took me under his wing when I expressed interest in going on the road with rock stars. I grew up a Christian. Not a good one, but a Christian nonetheless. I remember the basic lessons, but nothing too specific. Do good unto others, choose light over darkness. Follow Jesus and be compassionate. I had long since ditched the dogma part, and I didn't believe Jesus was the literal Son of God, nor that accepting him as my Lord and Savior booked me a one-way ticket to a place called heaven. But the memories of everything I was told growing up stuck around. The lessons you learn as a kid make an imprint on your soul. No matter how hard I ran from my past, I would always believe some of the stuff, whether I wanted to or not. I'd suspected Billy had some bad habits for a while. So did Corey, but not that he was the Antichrist. That came later. I was an equipment guy. My job was setting up amps, making sure the guitars were properly strung, and emptying the spit cups before they overflowed. I realized something was truly wrong in the middle of a show. I was standing next to Corey backstage. Billy had been on stage singing a cover of In the Secret by a past their prime band called Mercy Me. Billy changed the lyrics. No one but Corey and me noticed. The crowd was too busy waving their hands around in praise, as were the rest of the roadies and equipment managers. Billy's twang cut through the noise, crystal clear. I wanna know you. I wanna hear your voice. I wanna know you more. There was a crescendo of drums and squealing Fender Telecasters, but I could still hear Billy's words underneath the noise. I wanna touch you in a special place. I wanna know you more. Corey and I looked at each other dumbfounded, both wondering if we'd misheard. After the concert ended and everyone was backstage, Corey confronted Billy. Billy, awkward question. Did you change the lyrics of that last song on us? Yes, sir, said Billy. A charming snake oil smile was plastered on his face. You heard me clear as rain. Billy led us back to a private room at the venue. He had a young girl under each arm. When he took the girls, Billy always said they were worshiping. But if I'm being honest with myself, I think I knew the truth all along. Billy, said Corey, following him into the room. Time to cut the shit and get honest. Once we got past the door frame, Billy looked at it, and the door swung shut. Silence descended except for the excited giggles of the girls. Billy's drummer and lead guitarist were there too. Cut the shit? Asked Billy. He unsheathed the Bowie knife he always kept on his hip. Get honest. He opened a drawer and took out a plastic package of white powder. Corey, you tell me to cut the shit again, and I'm liable to get angry. Billy sliced open the package with the tip of the Bowie knife, scooped a heaping pile of powder with the tip, and snorted it straight off the blade, kicking his head back and howling like a wolf at a full moon. I looked over at the two girls. Their eyes were blank, hypnotized or hopped up on drugs Billy had given them. Billy's drummer and guitarist were smiling. Corey's face was as white as the powder Billy snorted.
"Damn, that's good,"
yelled Billy. He spun the knife around, the handle thudding into his calloused grip. Without warning, his band members jumped up, grabbed Corey and restrained him. As Billy walked towards Corey, he looked over at me.
"Ever managed to tour, kid?"
No, sir."
"Want to someday?"
"Course."
"Well, that's good enough for me."
Billy shot me a wink.
"See you in hell, Corey."
Before I could blink, Billy stabbed the massive tip of the knife between Corey's eyes. As the front of Corey's skull split in two and his life faded, he had a final look of realization. "Billy, let's talk through." Blood rushed out under his eyelids and through the cleaved canyon in his skull. He slumped to the floor, sputtered, and died. The two girls on the couch started giggling even louder. Billy wicked the knife and rubbed off the rest of the blood on Corey's plaid shirt.
"And the tour rolls on," he said. "Got me a new manager."
He turned back to the girls, looking at them with a predatory smile.
"Your first job is to clean this shit up, kid," he said. "Me and the girls need to get back to worshiping."
My life had changed forever. My mentor was murdered, and Billy promoted me to tour manager. Of course, Billy lied to everyone, saying Corey quit. I kept my mouth shut. Everywhere I went, Billy's goons were watching. A week later, I read in the newspaper that the cops had found Corey's body in an alley. They nailed a couple of gang members for the crime. The next 2 months, September and October, were spent learning the ropes of how to manage the tour. I saw and learned a lot. On the same day I tried my hand at negotiating a last-minute spot for Billy, I saw his S&M torture chamber behind a hidden wall at the back of his tour bus. He and his bandmates had been tending to a few roadies before they closed the door on me. When the tour bus broke down one day, I learned how to argue with mechanics about the costs, while Billy went into the back of their shop and brokered a deal for a dozen guns with the serial numbers filed off. I got an insider's look at the musician's creative process, too. Billy loved sitting naked in his mansion between gigs, his beloved Ruger Mini 14 laying across his desk as he wrote lyrics. One weekend in late October, I was summoned. It felt like a cold blast of air hit me when I got the news. Every fiber of my being froze up. All I could see was Corey's dead body, his lifeless eyes staring up at nothing.
"Howdy, kid,"
said Billy, looking up when I walked in.
"Get you a beer."
He reached into the drawer. I expected a gun to come out. The blast, followed by a muzzle flash, would be the last thing I saw. But Billy just grabbed a glass and pushed it across his desk to me. I grabbed a Coors from his mini fridge, poured it in, and started drinking. Billy was buck naked. His gator skin cowboy boots kicked up, his massive dick slumped over his leg like a sleeping anaconda.
"Tell me what you think of this new song."
He pushed a sheet of paper across the desk. The song was titled Dudes and Deuteronomy. I scanned the lyrics, nothing too problematic until the chorus. Men fight each other. Oh yeah. Bitches try to save them. Yes siree. Put out your rump, little lass, and let me grab that sweet ol' ass. Men fight each other, and women intervene. What the hell was I supposed to say? Great song, Billy. I think it's going to be a hit with the Christian music industry. Every interaction with Billy felt like a balancing act. He was a powder keg. One false move and you caught a Bowie knife between the eyes. The right move. Billy could make all your dreams come true, but whether or not that was a good thing remained to be seen.
"Don't judge,"
Billy said, glaring at me.
It's a work in progress, motherfucker.
I hadn't realized Billy was pointing the Mini 14 at me, aiming the sight squarely between my eyes. I felt like a deer the second it sees the hunter and realizes the end's coming. I like it. Billy lowered the gun, broke up laughing and smiled that charming deceiver smile.
I'm fucking around. Lighten up.
Crisis averted. My heart started beating again.
It's a total piece of shit, said Billy. Took me 5 minutes to write. You wouldn't believe how easy it is to write Christian songs. Same few cowboy chords, a bunch of lyrics about Jesus being great. I pulled these ditties straight out of my ass.
He grabbed the sheet and pulled it back.
Don't you accuse me of being sexist, he said. That song right there is about female empowerment. Your species' better half stepping in when the boys get out of pocket.
He opened the top drawer of his desk and took out 2 bundles of powder wrapped in plastic wrap, setting them on his desk.
What's your stance on getting high? Billy asked. You ain't one of those little shits who whips himself for wanting to have a good time, are you?
I drink. I smoke weed occasionally.
You manage a Christian country music singer, and you smoke weed?
I nodded, still walking the tightrope, but beginning to realize that I'd earned Billy's trust. I couldn't decide what was worse, being on Billy's bad side or being on his good side.
Okie doke. What's your take on speedballs then?
I don't know what that is.
Heroin and coke. Get your heart a-thrumming and your brain a-numbing.
He grabbed his Bowie knife. I remembered Corey's last moment. Blank eyes, life gone. Blood spraying out beneath the lids like a busted spigot. But Billy just scooped a bit of each of the powder onto the tip of the knife, then formed a thick line along the edge of the blade. He held it up to my face.
Let her rip, good buddy.
I don't know. Billy started at me over the blade of the knife, the same one he'd used to murder my mentor.
Sure you do.
I leaned forward. The knife was an inch from my naked eyeball.
Plug one of your nostrils, you fucking rube.
I did as I was told.
Mind the blade.
Billy let it waggle in his grip.
It's awful sharp.
As quick as I could, I snorted the line. The sharp edge of the knife dragged across my upper lip, so close that a bit of my wannabe mustache floated down onto Billy's desk. I was hit with an instant blast of euphoria. In a split second, my fear lifted. It was the best feeling I'd ever felt. High and low at the same time, like my body was splitting in half. The stuff in the space between was pure nectar. I was ascending to heaven and sinking to hell, realizing the strange magic of both places all at once.
Now, I didn't tell you this,
said Billy,
but that beer you're drinking has a little extra something.
He smiled. I saw the devil. Billy's mask was lifting.
You've got a nice little nightcap running through you. Don't be afraid. Let it wash over you. The speedball's doing its trick. So's the acid I dropped into your glass.
Billy stood up. His dick swung between his legs like a pendulum, seeming to reach the floor like a third appendage. I recoiled at the sight of it, half expecting it to come to life, grab me by the throat and rip it out. Billy helped me sit down on a comfy chair, his calloused fingers like claws. He made his way to a door at the back of his office and opened it. 3 gorgeous women and 2 beautiful men walked in. A group of Billy's band members came in too, and they made their way over to his desk. Cloven hooves clickety-clacked on the marble floor. Billy grew in stature. Was it the drugs? I couldn't tell. But he was 8 feet tall, half man and half goat. His beard got longer, so long it almost swept the floor. Billy motioned to the 5 majestic creatures, their sex pouring out in stimulating waves.
Y'all take care of the kid now, Billy said. He's on the inside of the circle. It's a place of sanctity and bountiful love. We have fun around these parts, don't we?"
The 5 beautiful creatures nodded in unison. Then their clothes dropped away, revealing the perfect naked bodies beneath. The next 12 hours were the most surreal I'd ever experienced. My body was altered by the hands of 5 people who knew what they were doing. Every lesson I'd learned as a young Christian, be good, care for others, bring happiness into the world, was smashed. But this is what it felt like to be one of the people who rule the world. The power was terrifying. I felt extreme pleasure and extreme pain. I climaxed and plummeted. I healed and I bled. I even got a pair of tattoos. While 3 beautiful creatures were tending to my 4th orgasm, the other 2 held me down. A tattoo artist wearing a leather mask with a zipper on his mouth went about his work on each of my pectoral muscles. On my left, he created a jagged pentagram. In my bizarre mental state, I thought it was on fire. On my right pec, he drew a picture of a ram's head with 2 words beneath it: Billy's goat. Before I passed out, I heard what Billy and his bandmates were talking about. How to make sure they got the main stage at Creation Fest 2020. I woke up the next morning in a cloud-like canopied bed next to the most beautiful girl I'd ever seen. She had blonde, curly hair, tan, freckled skin, and dimples in her cheeks. Her breasts were small, and she had a butt so big it deserved its own orbit. She was my dream girl. The perfect summation of beauty that I'd imagined my entire life, but had never seen in the flesh. "I heard Billy let you in on some secrets last night," she said. She helped me sit up, then put a tray on my lap. It was a gourmet breakfast. Biscuits and gravy, belly ham, fluffy scrambled eggs, and fresh squeezed orange juice. "My name's Lilith," she said. "You can call me Lily." Nice to meet you, Lily." She smiled and fed me a forkful of biscuits and gravy. I noticed her nails then. They were long and well manicured, painted robin eggs blue with a delicate yellow flower drawn onto each. "He trusts you, you know," Lily said. "Billy, I mean." Hungrier than I'd ever been, I nodded, scarfing down the breakfast. It was heavenly. "When you get inside the circle," she continued, "you stay inside the circle." She reached over to my left pec and undid the bandage. I looked down to see the bloody, swollen pentagram inked onto it. The previous night I'd imagined it being on fire, but now it was just jet black stenciled onto raw skin underneath. "Stay inside the circle," she said, tracing the wound with love and looking at me with big brown eyes. Gently, she put the bandage back on. "You also have the mark of the beast." I stopped eating for a second, my cheeks stuffed. I'd forgotten the lessons I'd been taught growing up. Eating the apple like God told the first man and the woman not to. Lily loosened the bandage on my right pec to reveal the other tattoo. A ram's head with 2 words beneath: Billy's goat. My stomach sank. I was one of Billy's acolytes now. "Don't be scared," Lily said, smiling. "I'll guide you on the path. I'm to be your wife, after all." She smiled and kissed my cheek, tingling electricity transferring from her cotton candy lips and onto my skin. "One of your wives, anyway," she said. "It all depends on what you want. You're a general now. You'll have a harem, just like all of Billy's generals do. You can have husbands if you swing that way. I can be whatever you want me to be. And I can get you whatever you want." I nodded, then I swallowed and spoke. "You said I'm a general. What does that mean exactly?" "For the coming war, honey." Lily smiled sweetly. I noticed then that she was doing something with her robin's eggs nails. A spider. She was playing with a spider. There was a red hourglass on its belly, a black widow. Oh, fuck me. You trust Lily, okay? She said, caressing my cheek with the same fingers as the black widow was twining its way through. I'm gonna take care of you. October turned into November. Then December came just as suddenly. The days continued ticking down until Creation Fest 2020, which was only 7 months away. Billy's generals, I came to find, lived a life of luxury. Maybe luxury isn't the right word. I was fucking terrified and in a state of drug-induced exaltation all at once, morally ripped in half. Billy insisted we do drugs together almost every night in the war room, another word for his S&M torture chamber in the back of his tour bus. I looked on aghast, as flesh was flayed and innocence was stolen away, all through a foggy drug-induced delirium. Lily and I were married on Christmas Day. Billy wed us himself. We stood beneath a massive pentagram burning in the winter sky, brimstone raining down from above. One of Billy's dark priests served a flesh Eucharist skinned from the corpse of a war room victim. Another priest served goblets of blood to wash it down. That night, the night of Lily's and my consummation, I was cornered by a harem of men and women and beasts. I looked up overhead at the ceiling between orgasms. An inverted crucifix was bolted on. Jesus wept. I thought of my parents who taught me to be good, kind, and generous, and I was terrified. What had I become? Why had it come to this? A few nights later, standing alone on the heated floor in Billy's master bathroom and trembling in fear, I looked in the mirror. I had tar-black circles under my eyes. I had lost weight, my shoulder bones poked through the shirt I was wearing like broken kindling. The person staring back at me wasn't me at all. I was a dead man walking. What had I become? And why had it come to this? On December 29th, 4 days after my unholy wedding, I realized the time was coming when I'd have to make a decision to stay with Billy or try and stop him. Billy was on stage at a show. The audience was a mass of arms waving in unison. People praising a master they didn't understand. Dudes in Deuteronomy had become a hit, and Billy spread the defiled message to anyone who would listen. He was drawing a bigger crowd those days. Lambs coming to the slaughter. After the encore, Billy came off stage to an uproarious cheer. I was standing with Lily, who was always by my side. Her robin's eggs blue fingers had danced on my neck, sending shivers down my spine. Billy motioned back in the direction of the crowd, who were cheering for another encore. Looking at me, he asked, "Do you hear their bleating?" Then he smiled his deceiver smile and kissed me on the forehead. "Keep booking the venues," he said, "and I'll make you their shepherd." Every waking second that I wasn't being given drugs, watching people be tortured or getting fucked into oblivion, I spent my time trying to discern Billy's plan. An idea came to me one morning. Despite the hypnotic state of my life, I still found ways to tether myself to the real world. I read the news religiously, willing a story to appear that Billy had been found out somehow. But nothing showed up. Nothing except the news that around the world, coronavirus was spreading. It was part of Billy's plan, it had to be. Somehow it would play a role at Creation Fest next summer. In early January, during a stopover, I went to Billy's office in his mansion. All I knew was that he had to be stopped. I planned to quit and tell the cops about him. Hope they could arrest him on gun charges or raid his tour bus and find DNA or any number of things. But my plans changed once I got inside. Billy always kept the Mini 14 where he could see it, At the time, he was in his S&M torture chamber through a door at the back of his office. So I picked up the gun where he left it on his desk, sat down and waited for him. My thoughts raced for the next 20 minutes. There was still time, just run, a voice of reason said. Run and never look back. But I stayed. If I didn't stop him, no one would. 20 minutes later, Billy came out of the chamber, naked, covered in blood, to a gun pointing straight at him. "Who pissed in your Cheerios, kid?" he asked. "I'm putting a stop to this," I said. I found courage inside that I didn't know existed. My mom and dad's lessons to me as a young boy came screaming back. Do good unto others, choose light over darkness, follow Jesus, and be compassionate. It wasn't too late. It's never too late. Do good, choose light, follow Jesus. All signs pointed to blowing Billy's head off. But despite my newfound courage, my blood still ran cold. "I'm not going to let you do whatever it is you're trying to do," I said. Billy cocked his head. He grabbed a towel that was hanging on the wall and began mopping off the blood. "What is it I'm trying to do?" he asked. "Hell on earth," I said. "I've listened to your plans. Creation Fest 2020. A plague, I can't help but feel it has something to do with coronavirus." He looked at me solemnly. Then his face cracked up, and he began howling with laughter. "Coronavirus? What the fuck am I gonna do? Get a bunch of people together and give them the sniffles? Talk about a slow burn." He wiped the tears out of his eyes with a hand that looked suspiciously like a claw. "You know, not every bad thing that happens in the world has to do with the devil," he said. "Your species is a lot fucking dumber than I thought. You want to see a plague? I can show you a plague." Billy ignored the gun I was pointing at him, sat down at his desk and pulled out the twin packages of coke and heroin he kept in the top drawer. "One man's heaven is another man's hell," he said, grabbing his Bowie knife. "You do well to learn that, kid." Billy got some of each powder under the knife's edge, like he had a few months earlier, and held it out to me. "Care for a nightcap? For old time's sake?" I shook my head and kept the Mini 14 pointed straight at him. My guts had turned to jelly, and a trickle of piss ran down the inside of my leg. "Suit yourself." He snorted deep, and his eyes went wild. "So, tell me about your plan, kid," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You're gonna shoot me, is that it?" "That's what I had in mind." "What about Lily?" he asked. "You got tired of her? I've got a whole gaggle of geese you can choose from. She ain't the only one, you know." "It's not about her." "What about being one of my generals? Riches beyond your wildest dreams. Immortality. A seat at the head of the Dark Lord's table? It ain't too late to change your mind. Hell, I can even let you handle the whip in the war room more often if that's what you're after." "Fuck you, Billy," I said. Courage I didn't know I had cut through the fear. For a fleeting second, Billy looked shocked. I stood my ground against the Lord of Darkness, and said a prayer inside that'd keep my resolve. "My mind's made up," I said. "This isn't going any further." Billy nodded. "Better get on and do it then." Without a second thought, I pulled the trigger. There was a massive explosion from the end of the Mini 14's barrel, much bigger and louder than I expected, and the force I hadn't prepared for knocked me back. But when I looked to see what happened, Billy was still sitting in his chair, smiling. I studied the smoking barrel of the gun. At the end of it, one of those party favor flags that shot out with a word written in a comic font. Bang. Billy stood up, and I felt invisible ropes around me. The Mini 14 dropped out of my hands. He advanced with the Bowie knife. I remembered what happened to Corey and said another silent prayer. hoping it would be quick and painless. Out of the S&M torture chamber behind Billy, a bunch of beautiful creatures walked out, drawn by the sound of the gunshot. Lily was with them. They were naked, their hair sussed. Lily looked more beautiful than ever. Small breasts, big hips, skin so clear it looked like a doll's. Her robin's egg blue nails stood out in the dimness of Billy's office. "Baby," Lily said, rushing over to me. "Your tattoos." I looked down and noticed that 2 holes had burned through my shirt. The thread was incinerating, sizzling away like a wheat field on fire. The pentagram's outline was burning, as was the mark of the beast. The ram's head with a script underneath, which read Billy's goat. "Help me," I screamed. The pain was excruciating. "Please, Lily. He's going to destroy the world. He's evil, don't you see that? But we can stand for good. You have to help me." "You and your maniacism," said Billy. "Light and dark, good and evil. There ain't no God. And if there was, he sure as hell wouldn't bust his ass helping the likes of you." He walked over to Lily, smacking her naked butt with a hand that had turned definitely into a monster's claw. He bit into Lily's shoulder, drawing blood. Then he looked back at me with reddened fangs that seemed to be growing by the second. "Please don't kill me." "I ain't gonna kill you," said Billy. "I want you to spread the message." "Spread your message? What do you mean?" "Warn them of my coming," said Billy, his harem of concubines and acolytes walking alongside him over to me. "Write about this. Pique the interest of the ones drawn to the darkness. And the others, well, they're not gonna believe a goddamn word you say. You already sound like a fucking crazy person." "But At the moment, invisible stitches ran through my lips, cinching them shut. My hands were bound to my side. I struggled, wanting to reach up, get a finger between my lips so I could pry them open, but I was paralyzed. A needle that wasn't there continued its work, diving in and out of the flesh and making me wish I'd used the Mini-14 on myself. I had a feeling it would have been a bullet if the barrel was turned in the opposite direction. "You can't speak of it," said Billy, "but after I untether your ropes, your fingers will still move. Type to your little heart's content." He stood in front of me toe to toe. In his eyes, I saw something that never scratched the surface of until then. There was a void. A complete and utter void of anything, no compassion, no hatred, nothing. A lack. Consummate darkness. "I looked into the future," Billy said. "Fucking coronavirus. Creation Fest is going to be canceled this year." He reached down and took my phone out of the pocket of my jeans. "But this is your sword, kid," he said. "Wield it mightily. Spread the word about me and see if one God-loving person believes you." In his eyes, I saw the void filled. I witnessed the fury of hell. Slaves toiling amidst sweltering flames. There was a sense of humor at it all. Those who had accepted their generalships, Billy's goats, stood on top of the rubble and laughed at the cosmic joke of human existence. "As I looked into the future," continued Billy, "I came to realize that 2020 will be the year of bizarre shit. But an antichrist Christian music singer who's planning to bring hell on earth? Come on now, kid. It'll be a good story. Gear the few who read it up for the possibility. I like it when they run scared." I looked down to realize that my shirt had sizzled away completely. The fire outlining my tattoos had smoldered, leaving blackened scars behind. Lily came forward and touched them, but there was nothing gentle in her touch now. Lily's robin egg's nails had turned into blackened claws. I saw that she was no longer blonde either, no longer tan-skinned and big-hipped. She had dark gray features, skinny as a pole. Her hair had fallen out, revealing an oozing, sore-covered scalp beneath. "I told you I could be whatever you want me to be, didn't I?" she asked. "Didn't mean you saw who I really was." She was a walking corpse, and she was a living nest for black widows. They began clawing out of her pores and tumbling out of her gaping mouth. "Don't you fret, baby," she mumbled, her word muffled by the bodies of 1,000 widows crawling up from inside her chest. "You're going to sleep now." Lily raised her index finger and dug a claw into my head, right between the eyes. She traced a symbol, the pain worse than any I'd ever felt. As my consciousness began to fade, and I fell to the floor, I looked up to see Billy standing over me, the devil incarnate. "Too bad, kid. You'd have made one hell of a shepherd." I woke up hours later in a field, freezing half to death. A farmer found me. He took me inside and gave me clothes. But when he saw the symbols on my chest and the symbol on my forehead, he told me to get the hell out of his house. On the way out, I looked in the mirror. Lily had carved something between my eyes. It was a blackened upside-down cross, just like the one that had been bolted to the ceiling above the bed on the night of our unholy marriage. Fast forward to a little under a year later. I'm mute now. The invisible stitches are still there in a strange way. My lips move, but when I try to talk, no words come out. I can type though. My phone is my sword, but I'm nothing more than a pathetic, crazed crusader. One of the outcasts who Jesus would have shown compassion to. But would he have shown me compassion? I'm a shell. I sometimes wonder if I'm human anymore. A year ago, I went on tour with the Antichrist. As far as I know, Billy's still out there making plans, driving a meat wagon tour bus, and taking the leftovers to his charnel house of horrors. Creation Fest 2021 is scheduled to take place next June. And if coronavirus blows over, you better believe Billy's new manager will make sure he's one of the headliners. Billy played it well. I can't talk. I can only gesture around like a crazy person. I have an upside-down cross scarred into my forehead. Lift my shirt and you'll see blackened scars. A pentagram on one side, a ram's head on the other. Who the hell would believe a word I say? Maybe a few, but those are the ones Billy wants to know. The crazy ones like me, or the ones who seek darkness, who'd gladly join his army if they knew he was creating one. Billy's got a new manager. He has to now. There's a paltry audience for the time being, but the tour rolls on. In or out? On the other line, it's Robbie Clyde. Haven't seen him in 5 years. He got a dishonorable discharge from the Marines for trying to rob an armory. Sent him to the brig. Last I heard, he was still there. In or out? Robbie always had a real direct way of asking things. No bullshit. Give it to me straight. If you can't deliver the goods, I'll ply my trade elsewhere. Good to hear from you, Robbie. Answer the question. Give me the full question, then. I'll tell you more over a drink, but I gotta know you're good for the commitment. No backing out of this one. I look at my valet uniform hanging in the closet. When it comes to drivers, I'm as good as they come. Give me a Geo, and I'll push it until you're out of whatever bind you're in. Give me a Tesla, and I'll parallel park the fucker at 60 miles an hour without a scratch. But being a valet isn't cutting it anymore. The money's good enough. I've got a freezer full of Hot Pockets and a fridge full of Bud. But I miss mashing motors. I miss the rush. Never did any of it for the money. The high paid for itself. I think it over for a second, then I say, in. Robbie smiles so big I can hear his jaw crack through the line. That's what I was hoping for. Meet me at Earl's on the 101. And as if sensing that I was thinking of backing out, Robbie says, I've been going there a lot recently. Their Long Island iced teas are still a $10 blackout. I needed a blackout like I needed a hole in the head. But seeing Robbie after 5 years of radio silence would be nice. My life is full of ghosts. People I knew, fucks I threw. The past comes back to haunt me now and again. But when it comes to ghosts, Robbie's the Casper type. What time? I ask. Tonight, 7 o'clock, or you're out. Earl's is a neon-lit roadside joint cloaked in coastal fog. Strippers straddle chrome poles. Cigarette smoke creates a pea soup haze. Even though smoking within 50 feet of a building is illegal in my state. Everyone's in real good form tonight. I can see that through the open doorway. The bouncer scans me with his eyes. I'm average height and below average weight. A bit over 6 feet, 160 with wet clothes. But I can scrap, and anyone who sees me knows it. I'm a skeleton with a jackhammer pulse. Evening, says the bouncer. Evening yourself. Gotta frisk ya. Since when do they start frisking people when they walk into bars? Since last week, the bouncer replies. Guy brought a gun in on Monday. Shot a trucker in the gut. The dude's stomach is a mixing bowl now, and he's still in the ICU. The shooter's in the can. But we don't want that type of shit happening around here again. Policia are no bueno, as they say down south. That's not how they say it. The bouncer chews on it as if pondering lost afternoons spent in a high school Spanish class. Well, anyway, says the bouncer, shrugging. Gotta frisk ya. Don't bother, I reply. I've got a permit for it, concealed. Put it in your car, then. I haven't been gun-free since before I joined the Marines. No one takes my piece. No one tells me where to put it. I'm meeting someone. I don't give a flying shit who you're meeting. No guns. And if you keep it up... Someone comes into the tin-frame doorway behind the bouncer, cigarette hanging out of his mouth like a loose tooth. He's all right, says the guy in the doorway. Fanning the smoke away from my eyes, I see that it's Robbie Clyde. Leave him be, Cletus, Robbie says, clapping the bouncer on the back. That ain't my fucking name. Jesus Christ, said Robbie. People need to lighten up. Maybe I'd be better off going back to the brig where everyone doesn't take life so goddamn seriously. Cletus turns back to me, gives me one more scan for good measure, and steps aside. Just don't stir up any trouble. I follow Robbie past the door and into Earl's. When we get inside, he turns around and pulls me in for a hug. Long time no see, friend, he says. Things good? Good as they can be parking rich people's cars for a living. I remember Afghanistan with a strange sense of fondness. I remember Robbie's and my tour together. I remember the convoys we ran, driving the Humvee with Robbie sitting shotgun, his M4 lying across his lap. I remember the friends we made. Some came home. Some got their heads blown off on the baking hut's sand. I also remember the decision I made to opt out of Robbie's armory heist, too. Our paths forked, but we shared the experience of seeing the hell of war standing side by side, even though we did different things after the tour wrapped up. "You look good," says Robbie. "May I buy you a lap dance?" He motions to one of the strippers. She's got a honey-made complexion that makes the neon orange leggings she's wearing buzz like a sugar rush. I give Robbie's offer some genuine consideration, but I shake my head. "I'm all set. I'd love to take you up on that drink, though." "Done," says Robbie. He leads me toward the back of Earl's. I'm expecting us to stop at the far corner and order drinks. But we pass by the bar. We pass by the booths filled with crusty patrons looking to drink away their problems. Cigarette smoke stings my eyes. The skunk stench of high-quality weed mixes in. I smell something chemical, too. Meth, probably. Earl draws a rough crowd. Leather-clad bikers with tattoos their moms would hate sit like birds on a wire at the bar. Truckers with ass sores from hauling freight 400 miles a day occupy the comfier booths. Whatever's in the haze of Earl's, I'm high by contact. Walking through the red door and into the back of the bar feels like walking into a different world. I should have turned around right there and got the fuck out. Hindsight's 20/20, as they say. If we all had crystal balls, there would be peace on Earth. But that isn't the way it works. Life's about making more good decisions than bad ones, and praying to God the ratio is favorable enough that you get through unscathed. When Robbie and I walk into the back room, I see someone else I recognize. His name's D. Richards. He served with Robbie and me. He also made the fateful choice not to go with Robbie on his armory heist, even though he came from a similar background as we did. That is, the background of people who consider going on heists, even if they have the good sense to opt out before things get hot. D was a sniper, but he was accurate to the nanometer with any gun. He could blow off a packle from 1.5 miles away without holding his breath. Did so to countless unlucky souls we met during our tour of hell. "It's been a while, D." He smiles that big smile of his, like a teddy bear. Friendly as hell, loving even. But he got programmed to be a killer just like the rest of us. All you had to do was flip the switch. "Good seeing ya," says D. "Didn't think I ever would." D turns to Robbie. "I heard about this dumbass trying to hit an armory after I got out. Glad I didn't get roped into that one." Robbie shrugs. In addition to his direct way of speaking, he had a devil-may-care attitude, which made living a life of crime a natural choice. "All right," says Robbie. "You guys take your shot at me, then we'll get down to business." I shook my head. No need to dredge up the past. I'll let D look like the asshole. "Appreciate that," says D, shooting me a wink. While Robbie goes back to the bar to get me a drink and D sits down, I notice another person in the room. The back of his head, anyway. And even though all I can see is the back of his head, I realize I don't know him. "Who are you?" I ask. Up until then, all I saw was the eggshell white of his dome. When I see his face, I find myself wishing he turned back around. He's without question the ugliest person I've ever seen. He looks like an aging boxer whose face got altered one too many times. His right eye is blind, and it rolls around milkily in its socket. He's shorter than I am, but heavier, and using my soldier's radar, my ability to sense danger, I realize he's not someone to be fucked with. Whatever rock he crawled out from under, I find myself wishing he'd go back. But before I can change my mind about things and leave, Robbie comes back with drinks and introduces us. "Now that we're all here," said Robbie, "I'd like you to meet Mr. Gray. The guy named Mr. Gray sticks out his hand. It's like a raw piece of ham. Big, thick cut. A raw shade of pink that makes me think twice about shaking it. I grab the drink from Robbie so I don't have to. I appreciate you coming on short notice, says Mr. Gray. Hard to find reliable help these days. Through the back door of the room, 6 more people burst in so suddenly that I reach for my gun. There are 4 bikers, the kind of dudes who run drugs, who kill first, and never ask any follow-up questions. 2 of them are carrying sawed-off shotguns. One has a Bowie knife on his hip so big, it may as well have been a machete. The other has a bandolier of ammo belted across his chest. The cartridges are massive. I'm a gun nut and a military man. I can tell with a glance that they're meant for an M60 machine gun. There are 2 other people as well. One guy who looks about as hard as an al dente noodle. He's pushing a wheelchair. Sitting in it is a woman. She's gasping for air. Her skin so dry it looks like powder. But even from a distance, I can see her ruby red nails, jet black hair, and striking emerald eyes. Despite being sick as a dog, the woman's beautiful. What the hell is wrong with her? Sick, says Mr. Gray. I can see that. What's she sick with? I want to know what I signed up for. Mr. Gray looked at me with a rabid dog's gaze. His blind eye rolls around aimlessly, searching for purchase. His jaw clenches like a vice. You haven't signed up for anything yet, says Mr. Gray. And I'm starting to wonder if we don't need you after all. I look at the bikers. Their trigger fingers are inches from home, waiting for an excuse to light me up. Robbie steps in. Hey, calm down, everyone. I find it hard. The girl's hyperventilating now, her skin becoming more dry and powdery by the second. A strong gust of wind would blow her away. D steps up beside me, sensing trouble. I see he's got a gun on his hip. Military issue Colt 45. Knowing D's aim and confidence, he could take out 3 of the guys in a shootout. I'd be good for 1 if shit goes south. We'd have a fighting chance of making it out alive. Mr. Gray snaps his fingers. The bikers, like dogs on command, step down. We don't have much time, says Mr. Gray. As you can see, our cargo is almost expired. I need you to say right now whether you are in or out. The convoy is leaving in 5 minutes either way. Robbie steps up beside D and I. He's in, Robbie answers for me. I ran convoys with him for years in Afghanistan. If you want someone behind the wheel, it's my boy here. Mr. Gray nods. So answer me, he says. Are you good for it? Good for what? I answer. And are you good for it? We haven't even talked about what it is yet. 50,000, answers Mr. Gray. I do the math in my head. Me, Robbie, and D, 4 bikers and the chump pushing the wheelchair. $6,000 to 50,000 each, says Mr. Gray. He nods to the bikers. These boys are salaried. 50,000. Enough to take a year off. Enough to start saving. Get a new life that's halfway worth living. What's the catch? No catch, says Mr. Gray. It's an hour-long job at most. He beckons to me. I walk forward as if drawn by an invisible magnet. I look at the table Mr. Gray is sitting at. There's a map laying over it. I see Earl's March clearly, seated astride the 101. In black Sharpie, Mr. Gray has drawn a route running from Earl's down to a lake. Having looked at 1,000 maps, I estimate that the lake's a few miles away at most. "I need you to get her to the lake," he said. He points back to the girl in the wheelchair. "The oxygen in the room isn't enough. She's dying, quickly. A punctured lung, maybe. In need of some meds that we can't give her." $50,000 plus the sympathy I feel for people in pain, which always made me a liability as a soldier, is enough to convince me at the moment that I'm in. "What's at the lake?" I ask. For the first time, I notice that Mr. Gray has a mouth full of gold teeth. "Salvation," he says. I follow Mr. Gray, the bikers, and the wimp pushing the wheelchair out back. Robbie and Dee are next to me on either side. "It's enough to start over." Robbie's nodding to himself. "50,000's enough to get out of the life." "Damn straight," says Dee. "What's at the lake, Robbie?" I ask. He shrugs. "No clue, but if we get there, we're good. We've done this before." I ran convoy, sure, but they were in armored trucks, most often Cougar. My breath hitches. "Thought you'd like it," said Robbie. "It's a blast from the past. A Cougar 6x6 AMRAP. The same model I drove in Afghanistan. If you've never seen one before, think of a Humvee on steroids. You could drive a Cougar through a wall made of 6 feet of reinforced concrete. The things are made to withstand IEDs. The ones I drove during the war made it through firefights without a scratch." Dee claps a hand on my shoulder. "Like old times," he says. "Where the fuck did this guy get a Cougar?" I ask. "Not sure." "And more importantly," I interrupt, "why do we need one?" Robbie wipes his forehead with the back of his hand. I hadn't noticed until then that he was sweating. Robbie rarely got nervous. Whatever we gotten ourselves into had done the job. "I think we can expect a firefight going down," says Robbie. "But all we gotta worry about is sticking to the script. Like I said, we've done this before." One of the bikers opens the back of the Cougar. The 3 others help the limp noodle who's been pushing the wheelchair lift the dying girl inside. She's taken a turn for the worst. Now, she's screaming. In addition to disintegrating into powder, what's left of her lungs is rotting in real time, making it sound like she's underwater. "What's wrong with her, Robbie?" "I have no idea," he says. "Mr. Gray only told me we'd be transporting cargo, but she's sick. And she's important to Mr. Gray. Important enough that he's willing to pay us an assload to drive her a few miles to a lake." He turns to Dee and I, pulling us in for a teammates huddle. "If we do this, there's more where that came from. Lots more." The 3 of us walk over to the Cougar. I check the tires. I check the exterior looking for faults. It's a brand new model. "Look good?" asks Mr. Gray. "Yeah," I say. "Real good." Before hopping into the back of the Cougar with the dying girl and her limp noodle caretaker, I see Dee open a gun case. Inside is a Heckler & Koch HK-416, the same gun used by SEAL Team 6 to kill Osama bin Laden. In Dee's hands, it's as good as a rocket launcher. "I asked for something with a little kick," Dee says, smiling. "Here we are." He gets into the Cougar, and the bikers close the door behind him. Then they mount their hogs, chrome stallions ready to fucking rock. The biker with the bandolier feeds the belt into the M60 machine gun that's been welded to his handlebars. "Robbie's got the map," says Mr. Gray, "but my boys will lead the way. All you gotta do is drive." "Who wants this girl?" I ask. Mr. Gray, for the first time, looks uneasy. "There are things much worse than criminals," he says. "Devils in fresh-pressed suits." The hogs ignite, belching out black smoke and thunderclap growls. "Just drive," Mr. Gray says. "All you gotta do is drive." I start up the Cougar. Robbie's sitting shotgun, an M4 machine gun laying across his lap, just like old times. I look in the side mirror and see that Mr. Gray is walking back to Earl's. He doesn't turn around. If he does, it'll jinx it. I've seen it before. Kingpins who set up the job, then throw up a prayer the plan works, never looking back, never second-guessing themselves because doing so is bad luck. I slide open the window to the back of the Cougar. Dee's back there, the machine gun yoked around his shoulders. The limp noodle guy is crying. The girl continues to die. "She's gorgeous," says Robbie. We're both staring at her ruby red nails. "Maybe in another life," I say. "I don't want to catch whatever she's got. Let's just get this over with." For the first time, the limp noodle speaks. "Water," he says to Dee. "We have to keep pouring water on her." He leads the way. I watch him empty a massive jug out of it, the kind you see in an office water cooler, onto her body. She soaks it up like a sponge. "If you say so," says Dee. A confused look on his face, but he follows suit, dousing the girl just like the limp noodle told him to. We pull out of the parking lot of Earl's and get on the 101. 2 bikers ahead and 2 on my flank. We drive for a few hundred yards. Nothing to it except for the girl moaning in the back. But then I notice something. Ahead, there's a roadblock. I can make out 6 cars and an armored truck. 2 of the cars belong to cops. Headlights off. They blend into the shadows. 4 of the cars are black sedans that belong to people farther up the law enforcement food chain. The truck belongs to a SWAT team. It's not so different from the Cougar I'm driving. "Fuck me," I say, pulling to a stop. The biker with the M60 attached to his handlebars cruises up and stops next to me. He turns off his headlight, then he motions to roll down the window. Before our palaver, he pulls out a vial of powder, jams it up his nose and snorts. His eyes go wild. He just got hit by a freight train of something potent, and now he's in an entirely different reality. "Hammer down," he growls. "I'll keep Smokey off your tail." The other bikers circle around. I put the truck in reverse and turn, and I notice that the roadblock begins moving slowly, wolves ready to hunt. As I turn the Cougar, I see that the biker has finished loading the ammo belt into the M60. A gust of wind blows back his long, greasy hair, making him look like a madman. "Robbie, we can still..." But before I can finish my sentence, the biker unloads. Hellfire pours from the end of the M60's barrel. The thunderous crack, 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 so loud my ears feel like they're bleeding. Both cop cars, which are in front of the shadowy cars further back in the formation, are shredded. Before turning to dust, their windshields are coated with red. As bullets from the M60 vaporize the bodies on the other side, a crimson cloud pours out of the busted windows, swirling up into the halogen light from the nearby street lamps. What the fuck? I start. But Robbie punches me in the jaw as hard as he can. Fucking go! He screams over the thunder. I put the Cougar in gear and take off after the bikers, who've already started hauling ass way down the highway in the opposite direction. Looking in the side mirror, I see that the cop cars have been reduced to shredded tin, metal slivers sticking out like a pop can blown up with an M80. The SWAT van guns it, driving toward the maniac biker who's still unloading with the M60. The massive rounds ricocheting off the armored truck like laser beams. The gunfire stops as the truck thumps over his bike and his body. I turn back to the road, shift up, and jam the pedal to the floor. Behind us, Dee starts yelling, "Fucking book it!" I glance over my shoulder. His eyes are wide with terror. She's changing. The girl barely passes for a girl anymore. Her arms have transformed, turning into suction cup covered tentacles. They've gotten bigger. They look like twin fire hoses snaking through the back of the cab. She's also started barfing up liquid, bright green, something that doesn't belong in a human body. But I realize that she's never been human. She's been something else all along. "Keep your eyes on the road," Robbie yells. I turn back, barely avoiding an oncoming semi, which obliterates one of the black sedans that's been gaining ground on my flank. Looking into the rear view, I realize my estimate for how many cops there was way off. There are at least 6 squad cars. 6 of the tinted windowed, black-bodied cruisers. The SWAT van, which has finished off the madman biker with the M60, swings out and joins the chase. It's just us and 3 of Mr. Gray's bikers, each one unloading gunfire into the cars in pursuit, blasting out tires and sending them careening off into the darkness, only for another to take their place. Robbie drops the map. Our route is fucked. "Drive," he screams. He rolls down his window. "I'll buy us time." Meanwhile, Dee has thrown open the back of the Cougar. The HK-416 erupts, sending 2 cars in pursuit wheeling off in opposite directions. Their driver's dead with the first squeeze of the trigger. Robbie's out the passenger window, unloading on our pursuers. He's firing over the head of a biker who sped up to lead me to the lake. The biker cuts left suddenly, and I follow suit. The turn is so sharp that 38,000 pounds of truck almost goes on 2 wheels. Robbie almost gets thrown out, his body parallel to the dark asphalt. Dee and the transforming girl hold on. The limp noodle wimp smashes into the wall of the truck, knocked out cold. Before Dee can grab him, the guy tumbles and falls out the back of the Cougar, fed like a piece of meat into the grinder of wheels in pursuit behind us. For the first time, I ignore the machine gun clatter, the shotgun explosions, the roar of motors. I'm back in Afghanistan getting my brothers in arms out of a firefight. I put my eyes on the road. In the distance, I can see it. The lake is at the base of the hill we're driving down, still a mile below. It shines like a blue jewel in the night, moonlight glancing off the surface in a pale flood. Right, left, straight, rinse and repeat. The biker in front knows exactly where he's going, like he's done it 1,000 times. The roar of his hog drifts back. I press the pedal all of the way to the floor to keep up. Over the chaos of everything else, I hear a new noise. It's a liquid screech like a foghorn triggered underwater. "What the fuck?" Dee says. He stops shooting for the moment, ill-advised. One of our pursuers gets off a shot, which hits Dee in his side, but he doesn't even notice. I look back. The girl has transformed into something otherworldly. She still has green eyes, which are searching the foreign interior of the cougar. She has the same red nails, but now they look like claws. And she sprouted tentacles, her arms and legs joined by 4 more. She's an octopus or a squid, something that lives in unknown depths. Her body is jet black. Her mouth snaps open and closed like a hawk's beak. Her eyes roll around crazily, and she continues screeching like a caged animal. Her skin has begun drying up again. "Water!" I yell. Robbie points to the back of the cougar as bullets continue flying in. Dee's hit 3 more times. Once in each leg, another one goes into his side. With dying breath, he grabs a massive jug of water from the wall, shoots off the sealed top with his Colt 45, and dumps it over the girl, the octopus creature that she's become. I look ahead, continuing to follow the biker in front, chancing another quick look back after getting onto a straightaway. I see that the girl's body has soaked up the water in a second, and she's grown in size. She's huge now, filling up the entire back of the cougar. She pushes Dee aside gently with a tentacle, then crawls toward the rear open doors. "Wait," yells Robbie. "Stop!" But she keeps going. Her body is riddled with gunfire, but it has no effect. She soaks up the bullets like they're droplets of rain. I look into the side mirror and see 3 of her tentacles shoot out toward the cars in pursuit. The first 2 smash through the 2 pursuing cars' windshields, making the vehicles and their occupants explode. The other tentacles pick up a car each, one shadowy cruiser, the other the SWAT van. They throw the cars 100 feet into the air, and they disappear into the darkness. The other biker on my flank is still there somehow, but amazed by what he's seeing. He loses control of the bike and crashes away into the trees. The octopus creature in the back of the truck continues fighting against our pursuers, but more cars keep coming. They'll never stop until they have her. I turn back ahead to see that we're almost to the lake. I press the gas pedal down even harder, pushing it through the floor. I follow the biker in the lead across the street that runs parallel to the lake. Before I can make sense of what's happening, I see headlights coming on Robbie's side. Another SWAT van trying to cut us off, going 60 miles an hour. It smashes into the cougar. My vision fades as we do a slow motion tumble toward the lake, and the lights go out a few seconds later. I return to the world, my head pounding. Even from upside down, I can tell that the cougar is totaled. We're flipped over. We're 50 yards from the lake. I undo my seatbelt, drop down to the ceiling. Looking outside, I see that Robbie's lying on the sand, 15 feet from the truck. His body looks broken. In the back of the truck, I see that the octopus creature is gone. Dee's body is back there. He's dead from either the crash or being shot or some combination of the two. I get out of the truck and hobble over to Robbie, my body screaming in agony with every step. Despite the carnage at the lake's edge, it's beautiful out. The moon is overhead. That friendly face my mom showed me as a kid is looking down like a kindly stranger. Ahead of Robbie, I notice one of the bikers. He's laying on his back, his hog nowhere in sight. He crashed, just like us. 3 guys in suits are making their way across the sandy bank of the lake, their profiles illuminated by the headlights of the cars behind them and the half-mutilated SWAT van that T-boned us. The biker begs for his life, but one of the guys in a suit pulls out a silenced pistol and shoots him between the eyes. I pick up the pace. "Robbie," I say, "we have to go now." I'm used to dragging friends out of trouble, but my strength is gone. Something feels broken. Robbie's eyes blink open. I can't," he groans. "Can't move. Something's twisted." Behind him, I see that the three guys in suits, agents from some top-secret government department, are getting closer. They all have their guns drawn. I think for a second about trying to lift Robbie on my shoulders, but I quickly realize that option's out. So I cover Robbie with my body. I'll take the first bullet, buy him any time that I can. Inside, though, I realize the truth. This is where it ends. This is our Alamo. Coincidental that we die on a bed of sand in the States, when so many did the same, far away from home in the Middle East. The agents arrive. They point their guns at us. Overhead, that kindly stranger moon keeps staring down. In my last few seconds of life, he brings me comfort. "You should have given her over," says the agent in charge. "But it's done now." Suddenly, across the bright, pale face of the moon, I see something cross. It's a strange, unnatural shape. A tentacle. I heard the hairpin trigger of the agent's gun creaking as he starts to pull it. But before he finishes, an oily black hand reaches over his face. It has ruby red claws. They sink into his eye sockets. With incredible alien strength, the thing rips back the agent's head. His neck opens like a second mouth, spraying Robbie and me with blood. Before the other two agents can make sense of what's happening, they meet the same end. I sit up. I look out at the water. The octopus creature has risen out of it, 1,000 times the size as it was in the back of the cougar. Its body is hydrated with lake water. It's at full strength. It levitates, a waterfall pouring out beneath it. 3 bashes from the other tentacles destroy the fleet of cop cars and the SWAT van that's left, and the chorus of screams quickly dies. The creature looks down on Robbie and me indifferently. Now, it's risen 20 feet over the lake. Its body blocks out the light of the moon, creating a terrifying alien silhouette. I see the girl's eyes, the same ones I saw in the back room at Earl's. Bright, emerald green. They're windows into an alternate universe. With a sudden flash of movement and blinding light, the creature explodes away toward the stars. The force of it sends a tidal wave of water rushing up from the lake, covering Robbie and me and rinsing away our sins. Then, the thing is gone. I'm lying with Robbie on the sand. The job is done. A job so strange, so unfucking believable, that it doesn't even count as a job. Sirens sound in the distance, getting closer by the second. But before they arrive, I feel 2 hands grab beneath my armpits. I'm being pulled away across the sand. Looking behind me, I see Mr. Gray. The last surviving biker is pulling Robbie. "We have to get you the hell out of here," says Mr. Gray. "They're coming." Letting Mr. Gray pull me away, I stare up at the stars. I can't shake the feeling that something is staring back. I wake up and feel sunlight shining through a window. It's morning. Hours have passed since what happened at the lake. I blink open my eyes. My body feels like it went through a thresher, but I'm alive. Sitting next to my bed is Mr. Gray. On his other side is Robbie, fast asleep in the adjacent bed. I see Robbie's chest rise and fall. He's alive too, despite the odds. The last remaining biker sits in a chair by the doorway, peeking through the blinds, his sawed-off shotgun laying across his lap. We are in a cheap motel room. If I open the nightstand, I know there'll be a Gideon's Bible waiting for me. I clear my throat. My chest blooms with pain. "What the hell happened?" I asked. Mr. Gray smiles. It's the first time I've seen him doing anything but glare. His gold teeth shine in the morning light. "Kid," he says, "you'll learn eventually that some things defy explanation." He puts a comforting hand on my shoulder, as comforting as a hand like his can be. He stares at me with eyes that have seen things I haven't. He knows truths I'd never believe. But I've discovered the tip of an enormous and bizarre iceberg. It'll take a lifetime to make sense of it. Mr. Gray smiles even bigger. Those teeth. His mouth's a fucking goldmine. "Just know this, kid," he says. "You're in the game now." You have been given a chance. One single opportunity. Just for you, little one. You don't have to go through the horrors about to be unleashed. You can escape all of that pain. All you have to do is listen to my voice. It begins the same as before. You hear a faint hum that vibrates and slightly tickles the back of your throat. From the sky, the resonance builds and builds to a thunderous, ear-splitting blast of one of the 7 celestial trumpets. Every time a trumpet has sounded, it has signaled the beginning of another 3 years of misery, each more horrifying than the next. 4 times has the trumpet sung their song. Before the resonance of the 5th trumpet fades, you will be given your chance to escape. When that familiar tickle reemerges, an object will appear in the sky. As it nears, so does the intensity of the tone of that awful sound. You know that it is only a matter of time before that deafening trumpet is heard once more. However, this time, what is to come will be different. The past 4 trumpets were accompanied by things you have understood. Yes, they were terrifying, but it was all within the realm of what you accept as explainable. You understand the origins of an earthquake. You know why fiery mountains from the heavens fall. Science has given you sight from the archaic belief in the supernatural. It has no power to control the hurricane or summon the tornado. It has no ability to release the plague. This is different. The veil has been lifted. What is coming from above is an abomination. It is wormwood. He is called Abaddon, the Banished, and Apollyon, the Destroyer. Life as you knew it is now over, for he holds the keys to the bottomless pit that has imprisoned his army since even before the words, "Let there be light," were spoken. Do you remember the first time we spoke, little one? After the 2nd trumpet had blown, you were given a vision of the pools of Nakuna Sachira. If you were able to find the location of those sacred waters, go there now. The moon has begun to turn red. Its crimson light makes the waters appear to be that of blood. Stand in the center of the 3 pools. Tread carefully, for you stand before the image of the sacrament laid upon this symbol. Each pool has a name: the pierced left hand, the pierced right hand, and the pierced foot. Prepare yourself to receive the blessing of the pierced abdomen. The blessing requires you to be anointed with the ethereal spearhead that will now run you through. There is no outward wound, but your blood is now seeping internally into the empty places within you. Your body has now become the fourth pool of sacrifice. When you collapse from the pain, ensure that you fall into one of the pools of water. If you fall onto dry earth, you will have missed your only chance to enter the portal. You will lose the anointment and be healed. But you will live the remainder of your days marked as was Cain, hunted by both angel and demon. If successful, you will awaken in a dark and dank candlelit stone building, lined with pews ending at a great altar. This is the place of worship, where the crossroads meet. Behind you are 3 large mirrors, very similar to the pools that you recently stood before. Look to the altar. A tall, thin-hooded figure is standing before it. Slowly and cautiously approach this menacing creature and kneel in front of it. Bow your head. Do not make eye contact. Extend your arms in front of you with your palms facing upwards. Say nothing. The figure should be deep in prayer, whispering strange incantations. If it is not, do not approach it. Only proceed if it is in prayer. Do not interrupt. Any disruption will be considered a great offense, a crime paid in blood. Be patient and make no mistake. It knows you are there. Once it has considered you and deemed you worthy, it will acknowledge your presence and ask, "Why have you come before me?" If it decides you are not worthy, well, there really isn't much more that needs to be said. Now is there? Quickly ask it the following question: what is the image of God? It will slowly lift its head. Close your eyes. Shut them tight. You will hear its body creaking, like breaking limbs of tree branches from an ancient forest. It will move quicker than what seems possible. It will grab you by the wrists and lift you off of the ground, one-handed. With the other hand, it caresses your face, then embraces your head from the nape of the neck. Its bony fingers envelop your entire head from behind. The ferocity of its grip is both sensual and violent. You're dangled helplessly above the ground as it lifts you closer to the face hidden in the shadows underneath its dark and worn hood. You can feel prickly dust coat and sting your face as it exhales its dead and rancid breath over you. A scabbed tongue emerges from the mouth, hidden in the darkness of its hood, and begins to probe the entire surface of your face. It finds particular interest in where your eyes rest. It is here where it wants to enter. The cold, lumpy tongue will start pushing and poking, squeezing and groping the tops of each eyeball through your eyelids. You feel the shame and demoralization intensely from the molestation. Pressure builds in your head from your closed eyes as it continues to violate the fragile organs that hide behind your thin lids. The scabs feel like hundreds of little fingers, with tiny fingernails that quickly find where your eyelids meet and begin to scratch viciously to try and pry them open. Shut your eyes tighter. It will groan with perverted masculine and feminine excitement of carnal desire as the little fingers intensify their efforts to dig into your eyes with raw and obscene desperation. The moans of pleasure sicken you as you resist the assault. one of the scabby protrusions bursts, coating your face with a hot, sticky, tar-like fluid that slightly burns. The putrid afterbirth from the abscess spill onto you as the tongue continues to relentlessly throb on the surface of your closed eyes. Suddenly, the tongue withdraws, and there is silence. Keep your eyes shut and wait. Eventually, you begin to make out a faint sound coming from the being. It is a cross between a moan and a hum. It's not quite a voice singing, as there is no melody to the sound. But like melodic singing, there is a flow to the tones and variation in the intonation. Listen carefully, and the words will emerge for you to hear. It happened after the sons of Adam had multiplied in those days. The angels, the children of heaven, beheld them, and some became enamored with the image from whence he was created. They conspired amongst each other and said, "Come, let us select for ourselves from the progeny of men." And so, we were drawn unto them by an insatiable hunger and thirst, a sensation unfamiliar to our kind. We then swore all together and all bound ourselves by mutual execrations to abandon our holy station. We descended upon Ardus, which is the top of Mount Armon, and devoured all which the labor of men produced. To our delight, the flesh of man cried out to us in return, and embraced our new form. They loved us, and we came to love them. Never had such pleasures of skin, pleasures of sight, pleasures of the tongue, and pleasures of the mind been experienced by any living being. Man was shown the wondrous transcendence of the grotesque and revealed to the vile decadence of purity. During our time together, we taught them sorcery and incantations. We gave them knowledge of the forging of metal and healing with herbs. We instructed them in the ways of architecture and mathematics. We revealed power so great, it allowed them to command the atom from within the rockets of the mountain and from the water of the sea. We freed their minds and released them from the enslavement of the Father. In turn, they worshipped us and their love for us strengthened. They basked in our adoration, but it was not true love we bestowed. It was deception. Our actions and deeds came with dire consequences. We had angered the Creator and desecrated His creation. Mad with rage, the Father plunged His hand into the fabric of reality and altered the delicate strands of fate and possibilities. With His divine manipulation, He altered the pattern and set into motion a new future in the predestined plan. We had been judged. We had condemned ourselves and humanity to an eternity of suffering and pain. Our bodies would be scorched and burned until the end of time in a lake of fire and brimstone. However, all was not lost, for we had discovered the forbidden secret: man. They were our true salvation. We prepared and molded them in our image, and when they were ready, we begot the Nephilim. It will lean closer and whisper ever so softly into your ear. I shall grant thee thy request, for it is the seed to the holiest of lies, the very lie that brought forth original sin. A great harvest will come about from that seed, a seed that is the very fruit of the knowledge of the good and the evil. It is such forbidden knowledge that binds the Creator to the laws of His creation, a way to deceive the eyes of the One who is all-seeing and thwart the mind of the One who is all-knowing. But be warned, For if I bestow this wisdom unto thee, forever will it bind thee to my will. Behold, the answer thou seek is, thou art not of the image. Then it stops. You are alone in the darkness. Slowly open your eyes. I know you were scared, little one, but it is safe now. Get to your feet. The great altar has split open and revealed an entrance that allows you to proceed onward. The pain in your side must be getting worse by now. I can see a protrusion the size of an apple has formed on your side. You don't have much time. Enter the altar and move on. You proceed down a long corridor lined with mirrors. If you look into the mirrors, you may notice that some show your reflection and others do not. Keep moving. Do not waste time here. There is no truth here for you to find. It is difficult not to notice your reflections are all slightly different from a mirror to mirror. In one, you may be younger or older. Your hair may be longer or shorter. Clothing may be different. In others, there is no reflection at all. Once again, move on. There is nothing here for you. Your life is slipping away faster than you realize, and we still have so far to go. Go to the beginning at the end of the passageway. You enter a large opening with a dark ravine separating you and a structure containing stairs leading up to what appears to be a temple. From the ravine grows thick black horns that slightly sway, even though there is no wind. Their points glisten with a substance that can only be poison. Do not get too close. In the center of the ravine is a single pathway that jets up from a thicket of needles and thorns that will provide you safe passage to walk upon. The pathway ends at the far end to the front of the stairways of the temple. At the top of the stairs, there will be 4 thrones, where the ones known as the 4 living creatures reign. They are covered with eyes, in front and in the back, and they looked down on you with an unnerving, mischievous stare. The first living creature is that of a lion. The second is like an ox. The third will have a face of a man. And the fourth is like a great eagle. Each of the 4 living creatures will have 6 wings covered with eyes all around, even under its wings. It is said that day and night, it is always chanted before them, Swadaha, Swadahaya, Swadahaya, Kavwada, Savada, Parakarama, Savamana, Vana, Devayana, Vehanase, Vana Atara, Pemana, Ayata. At the foot of each creature, there will be a body on its knees, its face looking up to the sky, with its arms outstretched upward frozen, in the act of eternal worship. Its flesh is bleached white and sags loosely from its bones. It wears a blood-red smock from its waist down to its feet. It holds rusty and dirty curved blades. You are most fortunate their backs are to you, and their mutilated faces are obscured from your view. Branded on their backs is an unfamiliar rune that looks like the letter B. They are the Baish. Cautiously move past them. The Baish were 4 men, great kings and leaders of the world. They ruled vast lands that ran red with blood from every man, woman, and child who had the misfortune of being born into their realms. The 4 kings were like grown children, spoiled and naked, fighting each other, biting and gnawing at the tits of their great mother Earth. Her face beaten and scratched from when they would feed so viciously. They knew only to gorge on her black milk that flowed from deep within her bosom. Their greed and decadence, their very existence offended all who could peer through the veil. Their wicked lives were ended the day they were raptured and bound like statues within the walls of this great temple. They must now worship the four living creatures, as they once commanded others to worship them in life. They suffer now, as their kingdom suffered. For every son and daughter who found death from fighting the wars they created. Their skin is blistered and torn, and their eyes are stung with the venom from the tail of 1,000 scorpions. But if they are awakened from their trance, and given use of their limbs once again, one can be well assured they will not be pleasant. In unison, the four creatures will hold up a key, each with a unique emblem on its end, and speak, "Choose. Choose now. Choose once. Choose quickly." The first creature that looks like a lion will offer you its key and say, "Acquiesce." The ox will offer you its key and say, "Leviathan." The third creature with the face like a man offers its key and says, "Clithradate." Lastly, the creature that is like an eagle will offer you the final key and say, "Sithrisma." As the last key is presented, you hear brittle crackling, like autumn leaves from the movement of dead skin from behind you. Make your choice. Make it quickly. The Baish are beginning to stir. Once they see you, they will catch you, and they will kill you. Make your choice. You will know which one to choose, I promise. Take the key and run. Run faster. Run faster. They are coming. Their howls are high-pitched gurgles and hisses. The screeches build as they close the distance between you and them. The slices of their blades come closer and closer. The blood pouring out of your mouth and nose cannot slow you down. Run faster. Run faster. Do not stop until you reach the church of worship. Head straight from the mirrors you saw when you first awoke in the church. Do not slow down. Run headfirst into it. Crash through it. Do not look back. You will awaken shortly. The pools of water are now dried up earth, cracked and barren. The moon should be at its peak redness now. In the distance on the plain, you should see a piercing shimmer of light. It is only temporary. As the moon loses its red shade, the beacon too begins to diminish in darkness. I am so sorry you are in so much pain, dearest little one. It pains me to ask any more of you. Your precious body has so little left to give. It is so weak and fragile. But I must ask one last thing of you. One final plea I must beg of you. You must reach that beacon of light in the distance before the last of the red moon shines down upon it, or you will be trapped. I am here for you. Push aside all the pain and despair. Listen to my voice and use everything you have left to get to that light. Now. Abaddon is here, even from miles away. His arrival knocks you off of your feet. Get up, little one. There isn't much time. Abaddon is near, and his thoughts are of nothing but you. You see the brilliant beam of light shoot up into the sky. The source of this powerful beacon comes from an archway standing in an empty plain. Within the archway is a massive and majestic door standing in the emptiness. With the key in hand, you must get that door open before the red moon shines down upon it no more, and any hope of saving you is lost forever. Ignore the wheezing sound you make when you breathe. Pull open that door. The blood from your mouth is everywhere. making it hard for you to get a good grip on the door handle. Pull harder. You only need to open it enough for you to squeeze through. The light is almost gone. Pull, pull, pull. You did it. Get in and shut that door as fast as you can and lock it. The light is gone. It is done. If you place your ear to the door, you may hear something that sounds like buzzing or fluttering. A sound that could only be made by the flapping of a million wings. There will be scraping, and there will be beating on the other side of the great door. Then, only screams. Behind you was a long, dark tunnel with a light at the end. Walk into the light and claim your reward, my little one. I walk into the bright light. Slowly my eyes adjust to the brightness, but I can already feel a warm breeze on my face and hear it trickling from a nearby stream. Everything slowly comes into focus. The most beautiful valley spans out in front of me. It is made of hills of green, sprinkled with every color imaginable, where the most beautiful flowers pepper the landscape. I walk toward the clearing and see a crystal blue pond. I dip my cupped hands into the water and drink. It soothes my chapped lips and parched throat. It tastes like nothing I have ever tasted before. It's amazingly sweet, and there's an odd sensation as I swallow the water. It's like a shock from a tiny bit of electricity, but without any pain, only satisfaction. I then catch the scent of an incredible and intoxicating aroma that overpowers me. I have never smelled anything like it before. On the other side of the pond is a gathering of trees. I instantly know that among these, there is a tree that is the source of that unceasing smell. I know there is no other like it. Its leaf, its flower, and its bark would never wither, and its fruit would be so beautiful and delicious. As I approach the border of the foliage, that's when I see them, a man and a woman. I freeze. The couple is walking hand in hand. I think they're naked. I make my way closer, making sure to stay hidden behind the bush so I'm not seen. I don't know why I'm doing this. Why should I be afraid of two naked people? Yup, they are definitely naked. I looked around and realized that my tree was at the center of the grove that held this paradise. But next to my tree is another tree. It was just as majestic and impressive, but there is something ominous about it, something powerful. I look carefully at these two unique and special trees that grow in this garden. I now realize what this place is and where I'm at. I am startled when I feel something vibrate in my pocket. It is the key that I chose. As I remove the large key from my pocket and open my palm, I notice the markings on its emblem in more detail. When it was offered to me by the winged creature, I simply thought it was marked with the infinity symbol. Now I realize it is actually a serpent devouring its own tail in the shape of infinity. My mind is unlocked. It is all so clear now. I know my purpose. I know why I was chosen. I know why I was created. It was always God's will to destroy his creation. Once destroyed, he could fulfill his promise to bind his enemies and cast them into the lake of fire, where they would suffer for all of eternity. The trumpets were a countdown to his planned end. Those branded the enemy had spent their immortality trying to find a way to prevent it from happening. But how do you outsmart an omniscient and omnipresent being? You use the very laws of existence against him. For with the creation of the universe, unbreakable rules had to be created. He had no choice but to enslave himself to those very decrees. Without those infallible systems of laws, the universe could not exist. The fallen ones realized the only way to prevent the end was to break the predestined, inevitable chain of events leading to the end. They must have figured out how to connect 2 points of existence, creating a bridge for me to enter. It causes everything to stop and to reset back to the very beginning instead of continuing the predestined path. It never ends. It never reaches Judgment Day. Existence is a loop. We are destined to keep repeating it over and over and over again to escape damnation. It is infinity. Like the serpent devouring its own tail. The serpent is thought to be Lucifer, God's true adversary. But Lucifer is not a thing or a person with thought or consciousness. He is the infinity of time, the only thing capable of denying God's divine will. It is the one simple thing that is protecting us from the wrath of an angry God. I feel its familiar presence immediately. I don't turn around. But even if I did, I know it would not harm me. It stands behind me for a while, quietly admiring the fruits of its labor. The fallen angel then inhales breath for air to speak the words that will be my final instructions. I look down at the key, mesmerized by the shape of the serpent. It is so old and worn. The jewel that makes up the serpent's eye twinkles, and I understand. I have one more thing to do. I wonder how many times I have done this. How many times have I crossed the bridge and stood at this very spot? How many? Man was created in the image of God, but I am not of the image. I am the serpent. I am Nephilim. The breath of a faint whisper, now sweat and warm, is spoken into my ear. Just 5 simple words. Make them eat, little one. I try to live my life without too many regrets. I've had highs and lows like everyone else, sure. But I do what I can, not to worry too much about what could have happened if I'd made a different choice. If maybe I hadn't taken the road less traveled. I figure everyone makes the best decisions they can with the information they have available to them at the time. Going through all of the what-ifs is ridiculous, because the only way you would have made a different choice is if you'd had some other detail, which of course you didn't. Hindsight is perfect, and even then, you can never be sure exactly what the sequence of events might have looked like if you'd gone right instead of left. And yet, there is one choice I made, one road I took, that I just can't help but wonder how things might have turned out if I'd only done something different. My job has me move around pretty regularly. I'm not going to get into what I do, but that has no bearing on the story. A couple years ago, I was working in Philadelphia and living on the other side of the Delaware River in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. I'm originally from northwestern Pennsylvania, and since this was the closest I'd been to home since I'd moved out to college, I took the chance to go see my parents whenever I could. I knew I'd be moving again before long, and my folks aren't getting any younger so I tried to find a weekend every month or so to make the 7-hour trip to visit them. If I'd been thinking about it when I was looking for places to rent, I'd have probably tried to live on the west side of Philadelphia instead of in Jersey to avoid the traffic during rush hour. But by the time I realized it, the lease was signed and there wasn't much I could do. The drive to my hometown was pretty boring, honestly. I'd take the Ben Franklin Bridge across the river, head up the I-476 for an hour or so, then a long slog across basically the entire expanse of PA on I-80 before another hour north on I-79 to Erie, Pennsylvania, where I'm from. The only variance in the drive was how long it would take me to get through Philly, because once I got on the 476 extension, I could typically predict my ETA within 5 or 10 minutes. My second summer in Jersey, I'd taken 2 weeks off and planned on spending the second week in Erie. Things changed that first Wednesday though, because a big storm blew through and knocked out power in a good part of the area where I was living. Dealing with 90-degree heat with no air conditioning wasn't something I particularly felt like spending the first half of my vacation doing. So after one uncomfortably sweaty night, I let my parents know I'd be heading over a few days early. In retrospect, I should have left first thing in the morning, but because I had a couple of things to take care of before heading out, by the time I finally got on the road that Thursday, it was past lunchtime and getting on toward mid-afternoon. For whatever reason, the traffic in Philly was particularly heavy, and by the time I finally got through town, I was a good hour behind schedule. Still, based on my normal timeline, I figured I'd still be able to make it early enough to grab a dinner and beer with my dad and brother before cashing in for the night. 2 things I hadn't taken into consideration were the number of other folks that apparently had the same idea to get out of town that I did, and the road construction that must have sprung up in the time since my last trip home. The interstate highway system is a heck of a thing. Being able to zip along at 65, 70, or in some remote places like West Texas even faster than that, makes cross-country automobile travel take a fraction of the hours it would otherwise. I can't tell you the number of times my folks have reminisced about the days before the interstate, when going to see friends outside of DC would take almost twice as long as it does now. What's truly remarkable to me, though, is that even though the entire system of highways was built start to finish in a mere 35 years, it sure seems like when parts of it go under construction, that they stay that way forever. Traffic was uncharacteristically heavy, but moving, and I was making decent time, until I saw the first orange warning signs, letting me know that our 4 lanes were reducing to 3, and then 2, and then 1. Hundreds of cones stretched down the road as far as the eye could see. And see I certainly could, as the cars in front of me reached a complete and total standstill. It was one of the worst deadlocks I'd ever been in. Seriously, I think I moved a mile in an hour. After about 3 hours, my stomach started grumbling. With an exit just ahead, and no end to the traffic jam in sight, I got off and found a diner to grab some dinner. Even if traffic miraculously picked up, I still had a solid 5 hours of driving ahead of me. So at that point, I knew for sure it was going to be pretty late that I was getting in. After finishing eating, I got back on the road. Things looked like they were picking up for a couple of miles. But then, I came up to the back end of the jam and was right back to waiting. We were moving a little bit better. I think averaging about 5 miles an hour at this point. But as the sun started edging toward the horizon, I pulled out my phone and started to see if Google Maps could clue me in on any kind of workaround. It's a funny thing about human nature. Most of us don't like to sit still. Studies at airports showed people would rather walk farther to baggage claim to get their luggage, even if the total time would have been less, if they'd have had a slightly longer wait at planetside. Well, the power of the internet appeared to be in my favor. Though I-80 still showed as a dark red band for another 50 miles or so, there was a southbound county road coming up in a few miles, and a northbound a couple after that, either of which looked like they'd let me bypass the worst of the traffic. Since I'd spent the better part of the day sitting on the road, my patience was about worn out, and I opted to take the southbound road, even though the app told me it would ultimately take about 30 minutes longer to get to my parents' house. I just wanted to get moving again, and reasoned at this rate it might take me more than the 30-minute difference to get to the northbound route anyway. And that is a choice that will haunt me until the day I die. I made the turnoff and immediately felt my mood improve. The signs alternated, limiting my speed between 35 and 40 miles an hour. But even that seemed like flying, compared to the logjam I'd spent the last several hours in. The drive was interesting. The road started a little twisty, with plenty of elevation changes as it curved up and around the hills of central Pennsylvania. It took me on a general southwest diagonal, but turned and doubled back on itself enough that for the first 30 minutes or so, I got regular views of the stalled traffic on I-80. Pretty soon after that, though, just about the time the sun was just dipping down beneath a couple of the hills in my rearview mirror, the road took a long curving tack and carried me down and away out of sight of the interstate. Now, something that a lot of people don't realize is how big of a state Pennsylvania is. Sure, there are plenty of bigger ones, but PA is deceptively big, and it is remote, isolated. Hell, the translation of the name means Penn's Woods after all. The Blair Witch Project didn't have to embellish that aspect of the state. The fact that you could head into the woods and walk for dozens of miles in any direction without seeing anything like another human being. It's got a decent number of big cities. Pittsburgh and Philly both have enough of a population to support major sports teams. But away from those centers of development, the Harrisburgs and the Pottsvilles, and the Scrantons and what have you, there's a whole lot of nothing. Nothing, and trees, and dark and lonely road. Such was the road I was traveling that night, winding through the twists and turns of the Appalachian foothills. I have moved around a lot, I mentioned, traveled through most of the continental states anyway. I sometimes used to wonder, when I'd be driving along a patch of asphalt surrounded by only untamed wilderness, what it must have been like to construct such a road. What had it been like before men had intruded with our civilization and our machines? What had lived there? I don't wonder anymore. Not since that night, when I went left instead of right. The way continued to twist back and forth, up and down, as I wound deeper into the foothills. The trees grew thicker, branches from either side of the road reaching over and almost touching it, forming a natural canopy 20 feet up that blocked out much of my view of the sky and the stars above. I drove with my high beams on, because the idea of streetlights had never entered the minds of whoever built this road. The painted lines were old and not well cared for, and I found myself gradually straddling the faded double yellow partition running down the middle of the two lanes to keep some distance between myself and the trees that increasingly encroached the pavement's edge. I've never been a particularly good navigator. My parents used to say it was because I spent my childhood with my nose pushed into a book during car rides. but I personally just think it's because I'm bad at it. So it was that. Despite there was no possible way I could be lost, as there were no other roads that I could have possibly turned onto and gotten off of track, that I more and more frequently found myself checking my phone to ensure I was still on the right path, which is how I almost ran into the other car. My mind was wandering, thinking about the fact that my signal bars had dropped and remained at 0 for the last 20 minutes, and what possible implications that would mean if I should have some kind of emergency. I raised my eyes back to the road after Google Maps confirmed for probably the 20th time I was still good on my route choice, and after my brain took a beat to process that what I was rapidly approaching was a vehicle, stopped in the middle of the lane, slammed my foot on the brake. I stopped in time, but not by much, with maybe 5 feet separating my hood from the other car's rear bumper. My heart was pounding in my chest as adrenaline coursed through my body. But my fear quickly gave way to anger. Seriously, what the hell was this guy doing? Not only was he stopped in the middle of the road, but all his lights were off. If I hadn't had my high beams on, there was a good chance I wouldn't have seen him before I was practically on top of him, even if I hadn't been checking my phone. I could feel my pulse beating in the vein on the side of my neck. I'm not somebody particularly quick to road rage, and after a couple of quick breaths, I managed to get a hold of myself. Not wanting to outright alarm anyone that might still be in the vehicle, I shifted into reverse and backed up about 20 feet, popping my hazards on. That's when I started noticing a few odd things about the stopped car, more than just the fact that the lights were out. Of course, it was halted directly in the middle of the road, but that wasn't unreasonable since there wasn't any shoulder to speak of that the driver could have moved it over to. The strange thing, though, was that all the other doors were open, those on the driver's side even crossing over slightly into the oncoming lane. And on further observation, I saw an item dropped out onto the road by the rear driver's side door, something that appeared to be a child's stuffed animal. I considered my options and, after a few seconds, decided that I would have to go against my better judgment to just keep on my merry way and head outside to get a better idea of what was going on. I said earlier my job doesn't have anything to do with this story, which is mostly true. But before you judge my decisions too harshly, it bears mentioning that I've spent some time in the military. An obligation to help people has been drilled into me over the years, and I'd seen enough things while deployed to feel I could handle myself. And so, I got out of my car but kept it running. I popped the trunk to grab the flashlight I keep there, and left my headlights on so I could see what I was doing. I looked up and down the road, hoping to spy signs of other cars approaching, but no luck. "Hello?" I called up to the other car as I cautiously started my approach. Circling around to the left toward the middle of the road so I'd be able to get a look inside before I got too close. "Anyone there?" No answer. The beams from my headlights helped some, but there were enough shadows to still obscure the car's interior. Shining my flashlight, though, easily determined that no one was inside. I moved closer, stooping down by the rear door to pick up the fallen object off of the ground. It was a child's toy, just as I had suspected. A stuffed rabbit with well-worn patches, showing signs of frequent love. I frowned. If the folks traveling in the car had hitched a ride with a passerby, they would have taken the rabbit, or the kid would have thrown a conniption. I shut the rear door and moved up to the front. I put my hands on the hood and found it was still warm to the touch. That meant it couldn't have possibly been here terribly long. I slid into the driver's seat to try and figure out if there were some kind of mechanical issue that would have forced the car to stop, and was startled to find a set of keys still dangling from the ignition. Pressing the brake, I turned the key and the engine started right up, headlights and the dome light on the roof springing to life. Fuel, oil, temperature, battery, all the gauges looked good. Not even a check engine light. Curiouser and curiouser. Then I saw the purse in the passenger seat. I picked it up, a normal brown shoulder bag, and briefly rummaged around before finding a wallet inside. Everything appeared to be intact. About $40 in cash, a couple credit cards, gym membership, Sam's Club card. The driver's license named the owner as Mary Walker, a pretty blonde that had just turned 30 the month before. A couple pictures showed Mary in staged poses sitting on a blanket under a tree whose leaves were turned red and yellow, captured in the thrall of autumn. A huge bearded lumberjack of a man hugged her from behind. A small ponytailed girl with a goofy, over-exaggerated smile on her lap. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, a shiver running down the base of my spine. Something was very wrong with this situation. I put everything back in the purse and returned it to the seat, turned off the car and got out, shutting the driver's door behind me. I pulled my phone out of my jacket pocket and dialed 911, holding it over my head to try and get a connection, with no luck. Cursing softly, I jammed the red end call button and moved around to the passenger side of the car. I played my flashlight around and noticed that some of the foliage at the edge of the road was bent and trampled, like someone had walked through it. I didn't have enough woodcraft to be able to judge how long ago they might have passed, but even then, I couldn't imagine any scenario for why they would have gone wandering. Shining my light into the woods, the beam only extended maybe 30 feet through the trees, before being effectively swallowed by the greedy blackness. Looking at the flattened foliage, at the stuffed rabbit in my hand, then at that dark trees crowding maliciously, my thoughts teetered back and forth between what I should do. I made up my mind. I'd been trained to help people. It was hardwired into my system. There was a child somewhere in the woods. I raised my foot to take a step onto the beaten path. And that's when a white flicker of movement entered the very edge of my flashlight beam. It was Mary Walker. She was naked and walking stiffly, unnaturally, her arms swaying out of sync with the rest of her body, like a marionette manipulated by an inexperienced puppeteer. "Hello?" her voice called out. "Anyone there?" More shapes came into view behind her, shambling along. Here the bearded man who must be Mary's husband. There her little daughter, owner of the well-loved rabbit. Both naked, both moving as oddly as their wife and mother. And now I could tell there were more, many more. Their forms indistinct out of the direct light, but so many they caused the darkness to pitch and swell with their odd, staggering passage, their voices a chorus. "Hello?" they called. "Anyone there?" Parroting back the questions I'd asked only a few short minutes ago when I'd approached the abandoned car. I took a stumbling step back, away from the woods and the approaching automatons, tripping into the walker's car. Catching my balance, I involuntarily shone my light up into the pitch recesses of the branches, and in doing so could just make out barely a sort of darkness crouched hidden in the upper limits, a void even darker than the trees. Was it my imagination? Those lines of pure blackness that extended from that concealed mass and seemed to pierce the flesh of Mary Walker and her kin, and the countless other shapes moving in concert with them. Hello? Anyone there? I sprinted then, back to my car, engine mercifully still running, headlights and hazards flashing welcomingly. Hello? I shifted to reverse, miraculously keeping enough of my head to avoid running off the road as I completed a 3-point turn. Anyone there? I chanced a glance in my rearview mirror. The pale form of Mary Walker stood, halted, just at the edge of the forest where the trees met the road. One hand was raised, beckoning me to return, or perhaps waving goodbye. Her face a mask of confused sadness. I pressed the gas and drove back the way I came. I did not look back again. The rest of the trip was a fog. At some point after I made it back to the interstate, I called my parents, let them know I wouldn't be getting in until late. I drove on autopilot, the traffic jam having cleared while I was off. I thought about calling 911, but didn't. What would I have told them, and to what end? There was no one left to be helped. I try not to go through life with too many regrets, wondering about what ifs. But this one, this choice, what if I had left earlier in the day? What if I hadn't stopped for dinner? Maybe I would have still gone left. Maybe I would have been there in time to help the walkers. Maybe I would have been taken by that black thing, fishing in the dark. What if I had gone right? Would I still be ignorantly going through life, unknowing there are other things out there? I try not to think of it too often, but every now and then, my thoughts turn to the stuffed rabbit. It wasn't until I reached my parents' house that night that I realized I still had it clutched in my hand. I used to wonder, before men brought our roads and civilization, what was the wilderness like? What lived there? I don't wonder anymore. I can't afford to. At least if I don't want to wake up screaming. And no matter how bad the traffic, I always stick to the interstate. My hometown is residence to a large and long-abandoned psychiatric hospital. Its official name was the Jonathan H. Murno Regional Psychiatric Hospital, named after the founder. Everyone else that didn't work there called it Murno's Mental Hospital. It's the same story as any large hospital in the US that eventually closed its doors for good. A large, looming building built during the 20th century, considered state-of-the-art at the time, was supposed to represent a genuine progressive advance in the treatment of mental health. It soon faced the problem of no longer being funded by the state, and was eventually forced to shut down. The patients and residents of the hospital, of course, had nowhere to go. Some ended up living on the streets. Others, according to the rumors I've heard, found a way to sneak back into the building, and have been living there ever since. I kept hearing rumors about psychiatric hospitals while growing up. My friends and I would sometimes relate stories about patients that live there, always trying to one-up each other and freaking the others out. My favorite was a story about a nurse who threw herself out the window of the top floor and was killed after her body hit the cement walkway below. It was added that sometimes you can still see her jumping out of the window and hitting the ground. While we told each other stories about Murno's mental hospital, none of us really ever went there. Sure, we bragged about going over there, even going as far as to say one of us spent the night over there. These were claims we called each other out on because, deep down inside, we felt a little spooked when looking at the old hospital building. I couldn't imagine any of us even going over there. Fear aside, we couldn't help but feel a morbid curiosity about the place and its history. I had just finished graduation and was planning to move out of town. I wasn't going to leave without visiting those old grounds. I invited all my friends to go with me, for all the talk we made about us actually being there. All my responses were, "I'll think about it," or "I might be working that day." Maybe they were actually busy, and maybe they feel anxious about it and don't want to admit it. Maybe it was a bit of both. The hospital was way outside of town, just past the farmlands. It was supposed to be blocked off from the public to discourage trespassing, but all I saw were a couple of posts with the words, "Private property," and no police cars patrolling the property. I finally arrived at the old Murnau Hospital around 2 p.m. It was late August, and the heat wafted around me after exiting my car. I took some refuge in the shadow of the large looming hospital. It was a large stone behemoth of a building, about 20 stories high, stretched out on either side. I turned behind me and gazed at the expansiveness of the hospital grounds. It wasn't just a hospital building. There were 3 others and a rusting water tower. From what I remember, there were more buildings than just the main hospital. The way I heard it, the hospital was also equipped with a gym, an auditorium, and its own water supply. When the paper said that the Murnau Regional Psychiatric Hospital represented an advance in the treatment of the mentally disturbed, they weren't kidding. The Murnau Hospital used art and music as a form of therapy in its heyday. Patients were allowed to learn music instruments and play for everyone. If they wished, they could even create their own symphonies. Physical activity was also a regular form of treatment, which explained the gym and racetrack. It also proved to be very self-sufficient. But that was a long time ago. In place of the famous Murnau Hospital were decaying ruins of a noble goal brought to its knees by overcrowding and budget constraints. I observed the toll that time and neglect had taken at the abandoned hospital. Weeds were taking over. The interior of the main building was littered with debris. Windows were shattered. There was graffiti over the gray, decaying walls. While walking around the property, I realized one thing. The rumors about patients sneaking back here to live the remaining days was false. I found no sign of life or habitation there. I saw a litter of candy wrappers and soda bottles left behind long ago, but nothing that could prove the place was still inhabited. While I explored the deserted hospital grounds, the hot sun became veiled by dark clouds overhead. The humidity was then replaced by cold air. I looked to the sky and heard the distant boom of thunder on the horizon. Strange, I thought. There wasn't anything about a storm in the news today. I had decided that I had seen enough of these ruins when I noticed a black car strolling up ahead. Trying to avoid the police for trespassing, I ducked to the nearest corner. I peeked around the corner and saw the vehicle ahead of me. This wasn't a police cruiser, I noticed. It was just a black car. I think it was a Chevy. 2 hooded figures in black robes exited the car, and they were taking someone from the back seat. I could make out enough details from my vantage point that they had a girl with them. She was struggling to get free from the grasp, as they forced her to the nearest door to the inside. I got the feeling that something awfully bad was about to happen, and that girl was in the middle of it. In my head, I debated what to do. On the one hand, that poor girl might be in danger, and I couldn't just do nothing. On the other, if I called for help, I'd have to explain that I was trespassing. I didn't want to put my future in jeopardy like that. I finally compromised that I'd just go in and get her out of there, and then take her to a hospital. She'd be out of harm's way, and I wouldn't get myself into legal hot water. I crawled out of the corner and past the black car to the doorway they walked through. It led to a row of stairs going downward. Before I took my first step, lightning flashed overhead, followed by the large boom of thunder. Then, rain started to pour, drenching me instantly. I walked the stairs down into a dry but dark basement. I couldn't see the two hooded people or the girl they were shoving and pulling here, so I made my way through the basement, which by the look of the washing machines might have served the laundromat. After exiting, I was greeted by a long, dark hallway. I only saw a bit of the wall before it faded into blackness. I felt like giving up hope and calling the cops anyway, when I heard screaming coming from the inky blackness. I couldn't make out if it were a scream of pain or danger, but it was feminine. Whatever it was they were putting her through right now could not be good. I stilled my shaky nerves and used my flashlight on my phone. It helped a little bit to navigate the darkness, but I could only use the girl's cries to find her. I walked through seemingly endless dark twists and turns. Not sure how those three people could have gotten away so quickly. With every scream I heard, I felt like I was getting closer. During the time I was searching, I felt cold too. My clothes were still soggy from the instant I was in the rain, and the air down there felt cold. I heard her cries for help one more time, and I intuitively knew I was close to finding her. A new sound followed her screaming. I couldn't make it out at first because it was too soft and low. As I drew closer, I could make out the sound of chanting in some other language. The chanting was accompanied by someone speaking, probably a prayer. The chanting and praying alternated, with a girl's scream interlaced between. I turned the corner and saw the glow of candlelight and two figures kneeling in the glow. I hid behind the wall and peered one more time. I only saw the two figures there, but I could hear more of them. I didn't see the girl anywhere, but she had to be there. There was a pause in the chanting, then I heard, "It's almost time." The two visible figures stood up, and I think one of them spoke next. "We need to get Anderson." And they walked off somewhere. I tiptoed around the corner so as not to alert my presence to the others. I finally got a better look at the girl, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The girl was tied to a metallic pole, her hands bound in nylon. Her face was speckled with dirt and filth. I didn't notice this when seeing her, but she appeared to be a full 9 months pregnant. The swell of her belly was poking out of her tattered clothing. She was covered with a blanket from the waist down. In front of her was a large circle in red, with 5 candles placed equally spaced around the perimeter. Inside the circle was a strange geometric pattern. I looked back at the girl, and her face was sweaty and full of fear. I knelt down beside her as I inspected her condition. "Don't worry, I'm going to get you out of here," I whispered to her while undoing the nylon bondage. The damn thing wouldn't come loose. She stared wide-eyed at me. I asked her questions like what happened and what they were doing to her. Her only reply made me stop what I was doing. "You have to kill me," she told me. I couldn't believe what I heard. "What?" "You have to kill me. Before it." Her face crunched and contorted in agony as she gave another pain-filled wail. I looked at her stomach, and it was pulsing. Something was squirming underneath, almost fighting to get out. "Listen, I'm going to take you to the hospital. No one's going to die." I tried again at the nylon, but felt 2 pairs of hands pulling me away from the girl. More figures entered the room, still hooded. Counting the 2 who were holding me down, there were 5 now. One approached me and lifted his hood off. It was a bald man staring intently at me. The others likewise removed their hoods. "What will we do with him, Anderson?" one of the men holding me asked. He towered above me and alternated between looking at me and the girl. "Make him watch," he said. "Very few people are privileged to witness the birth of the true Lord." The girl kept crying and yelling, and Anderson turned toward her. He knelt before her and lifted the blanket. It's time now." The chanting resumed. So too did her crying. This time, it was an inhuman wail of the deepest agony anyone would ever experience. All I could do was be held down and rendered unable to do anything to help the girl. She wailed still, and blood was pouring out between her legs and soaking the blanket. Anderson was kneeling and assisting the delivery. He kept urging her to breathe and push, while she looked like she was fighting to keep something inside of her for as long as she could. Then, she couldn't anymore. I heard the sickening sound of flesh, push, and the girl gave off one final wail. Then I heard a loud thud hit the floor. I couldn't even begin to describe to you the horrible thing that crawled out of her. Anderson turned to reveal their so-called true lord. I saw a mishmash of scales with patches of wet, dark fur. Its tail, if I could call it that, was the form of a long black snake. And its face, oh God, its face. It was something so unearthly and foul that seeing it made me sick with an existential dread. "Behold," Anderson shouted, "our infant savior." He raised the monstrous creature above his arms. The group huddled around him, and the 2 holding me finally let me go. I turned toward their victim, and she had gone still and dead, while more blood pooled around her legs. It was too late for her. And now, our Lord must feast. The vessel that housed him shall now give him sustenance. I turned to run, all while hearing the sound of the ripping of meat from bone and the sickening slurping of blood. I don't know how much longer I was down there, but I finally made it outside, and it was still raining hard. The icy bullets of cold water bombarded me as I ran to my car. The wind was so strong that I practically had to fight to keep my balance. In the distance, the town's tornado siren wailed through the harsh storm. From somewhere behind me, I heard a tree being snapped in half and collapsing into one of the structures. I fought the wind and rain and finally made it to my car and drove out of there. Nothing else went through my mind except that monstrous thing and what she went through to birth it. Then, another terrifying thought popped into my head. What is that thing going to be if it grows up? The cold of the hardwood floor was starting to slip into my feet. I must have zoned out again trying to get out of bed. I had been like that a lot lately, just staring off into space like I was looking for something beyond my vision. Snapping back to, I shifted my weight and rose from bed. I must have been sitting there for a while, as I could feel a weakness in my ankles. A weakness that made me momentarily buckle under my weight, but using the bed as a support, I was able to remain upright. I pulled my phone off the table and released it from its charging cord. Letting the bright screen wash over my face, I scrolled through the news and then to check on the local events. There was a report about a woman who had gone missing. Normally, I would keep scrolling, but this woman didn't live all that far away from me. Police were at a loss as the mother of the teen girl swears she was in her room at night and there were no signs of foul play. The article was tugging at me. It felt like some Reddit rabbit hole just waiting to happen. The girl should have been asleep. People thought she snuck out, but to where? The most tantalizing part was near the end of the article that claimed, "There are details we are unready to discuss." I tried to look on other sites for more information, but it was all the same no matter where I went. Giving up, I closed the tabs I had open and decided that looking into a girl's disappearance probably wasn't a healthy way to start my day. So I went through my morning routine, shower, dress, and sit down for breakfast. Reaching down, I dragged my fingernails across my skin on my ankle. I was still feeling that fuzzy effect you get when a limb is waking up. TV static for the body. With breakfast finished, I cleaned up after myself and started heading for work. A longer than I'd like car ride got me there. As I sat in my little cube plugging away at the computer, I could hear whispers running around the office. The news was spreading quickly until it reached me. A coworker leaned over and told me our manager failed to show up that day. I thought that was odd. The guy was always a punctual one. Got on my ass all the time for being tardy. A no-call, no-show was not his style. Another manager tried to call him a few times, but got nothing. I was zoning out again. I could feel my gaze binding to the manager trying to contact my superior. The manager seemed worried. I wondered if they knew each other outside of work. If they knew something we didn't. Still, I had a job to do, and if my superior returned, and I hadn't done it, I would be in a world of trouble. I heard another whisper slip into my consciousness. It sounded like a woman's voice, a sweet elixir of a whisper. I looked around me, at the 4 gray walls I was confined to, but even then, no one was leering over my walls. I stood up, perplexed to find that many cubicles next to me were empty, and those that weren't had male sat in them. Confused though, accepting it as a sign of my wandering mind, I lowered myself back into the seat. Work went on as you'd expect. Mind-numbing, busy work that never seemed to end on a computer a decade old. With work over though, I turned the computer off, my reflection appearing on the dark screen. I collected my things and stood up. Well, started to anyways. As my body lifted, I became very aware of the pressure my ankles felt under my weight. A stark pain culminated and ushered me to fall back into the seat. I rushed down and pulled up one of my pant legs to get a look. The skin looked completely fine, with no red marks or bruising. Prodding the skin with my finger failed to give me any sort of discomfort. Running my hands over the flesh, I checked for any cuts, any imperfection that would clue me into my pain. Nothing. The other ankle returned a similar result. I tried once more to stand up and was able to get steady, though I still felt pain. Once I had a day off of work, I figured it would be wise to get it checked out. That wouldn't be for several days though. So when I got home, I opened a bottle of weak painkillers and took enough of them to make it a stronger painkiller. The pain meds kicked in and I barely made it to my bed. I could swear as I was drifting off while someone was in the room with me. A figure looming by the window facing away from me. Upon waking up, the words stuck in my mind, although they felt more like they belonged to one of my dreams than they did the waking world. Shifting in bed, I pulled my leg up so I could touch my ankles, see if anything changed. It was subtle. There still weren't any markings under the light of the sun. I could see no discoloration, but the skin itself was lowered. There was a small dent in the skin that circled the ankle like there was invisible jewelry there. I felt the spot on my flesh for quite some time. Curious about how it might have happened. It was like when you wear socks for too long, and the pattern of the sock remains on your skin. Only, I don't wear socks to bed. I'm not a psychopath. Getting out of bed was harder this morning. At first I thought I'd be fine, but once I started moving, there was a sudden pain that sent me flying forward. I braced as well as I could as I hit the carpet. I wanted to call off work, but it's not a luxury I could afford. If the painkillers helped the day before, surely they do the trick again. More pills spilled into my hand and then into my mouth. Morning orange juice washing them down. I started heading to my car, ignoring the pain, hoping it didn't take too long to fade. While I was in the car, I reached for the button to turn the radio on. My finger hung close to the button, still unpushed. Nervously, I looked around the car for the source of the whisper, but I was so completely alone. Sitting in silence, I waited for the voice to return, but I continued to hear nothing, only the light thudding of my heart. I decided to go without the radio. I didn't want to reach for it again, so I started my commute. But I didn't get far. As I was driving along, I felt myself zoning out, and then the pain around my ankle increased dramatically, exacerbated by the pressure I applied on the gas. I had to pull over, unable to focus on the road anymore. Frustrated, I reached down and scratched at my ankle, fingernails digging into the skin. The dent that I felt became that much more noticeable. Sitting back, I fumbled around for my phone, intending to call work. I needed to have it looked at right away. Something caught my eye though. For a moment, I thought I saw someone was sitting in the passenger seat, my peripheral catching glances of shadows. Instinctively, I turned to the voice beside me, but my vision had betrayed me. I was still alone in my car. Outside the car, however, in the alley I had stopped in front of, there was someone. Initially, I thought it was a pile of garbage, but the more I looked at it, the shape of a slumped-over human was revealed. Ignoring the pain the best that I could, I pushed open the car door and pulled myself outside. It was a nightmare to try and walk. The fuzzy feeling that was present the day before had transformed into searing needles. My body fell to the floor twice, just trying to make it to the person. My knees and elbows being scraped up by the unforgiving concrete. As I got closer to the figure, I could feel my heart sinking more and more. "Hey!" I called out, practically dragging myself to them. "Hey, please tell me you're okay," I continued, grunting through the pain. There was a mumble, a soft, feminine groan that emitted from the person. It didn't sound like an affirmation of life, though. Rather, it sounded like a warning of death. My fingers frantically dialed for emergency services, and I gave the necessary information. Luckily, I knew my route to work well and was able to give dispatch my location. The woman in front of me weakly spoke. I crawled to the other side of her, trying to get a better look at the potential damage. The needles I felt in my ankle seemed to spread like a virus to the rest of my body when I saw the woman in her entirety, with the malicious sunlight revealing her horrid condition. Some of her looked fine, unaffected by anything, but the rest of her was completely dented in. It looked like as if an anaconda had strangled her life away. I could see the dented pattern creating a sort of spiral that winded up her body. Half her face was completely caved in. My body shook as I looked at her. I couldn't help but stare at the contrast. How did the undented parts of her look so normal? Yet within the spiral, she was smashed. Bones weren't even sticking out or anything, no blood, nothing. Though I had to imagine internally she was looking much worse for wear. She managed before the faint rising and falling of her chest halted. I stared into her eyes as the light shimmered on them, and then she faded. The ambulance arrived soon after, people rushing out to assess the damage. There was no doubt though, and she was pronounced dead almost as soon as they put her on the cart. The heat, her grisly appearance, and my pain all danced together, all perfectly in sync, bubbling within me. I let those three out. I let them spill out onto the concrete. A mess of that day's breakfast spilling below me. A pool of my insides baking beneath the sun. The paramedics checked me out. I didn't tell them about my ankle. I didn't think to. I couldn't stop seeing that woman's face. Once they were convinced I was okay, they told me to go to the hospital if anything pops up, and they were on their way. I drove back home after sitting in my car. I called work to let them know I wouldn't be coming in. My manager didn't even sound surprised. Told me I wasn't the only one not to show up, ending the conversation by saying, "At least you called." I had to drive slowly. If I put too much pressure on the gas, the pain quickly became unbearable, even with all those meds circulating through me. Getting home, I threw myself onto the couch. I didn't think I would be able to make it up the stairs. Normally in the morning, I would go through the news, try to keep up to date. Water cooler talk involves a lot of research. Due to my tumble earlier, I hadn't thought to check though. If I had, I probably wouldn't even have bothered to leave my house. It seemed like the entire town was on fire. Not literally, of course, but the news was running rampant. I sat up straight as I read through article after article of people gone missing. Report after report. Some of the names were even familiar to me, my manager being among them. My finger guided the morbid cycle of sorrow, revealing more and more of it on screen. Then I learned that the girl I found in the alleyway wasn't some outlier. With so many people missing, relatives were performing wellness checks. They would break into their loved ones' homes to find the same thing that I had. Sections of bodies crushed. It was always a spiral shape, though not always the same spiral. People were being mauled to death in their own homes. One fella even sat in his car, crushed. I heard, next to me again. I was frozen. I could feel the couch shift, pressure on the cushion next to me. My ankles started to flare up as the phone in my hand became unreadable. A shaky hand makes for unclear text. The voice continued. I couldn't get any words out. I couldn't even muster the courage to turn my head and face the thing sitting next to me. My heart raced faster and faster until a flight or fight response canceled out everything else I was feeling, and my body chose flight. Ignoring the pain, my body started lifting from the couch. I could see a straight shot to the back door. After my first step, though, I felt a tug, a pressure around my ankles unlike before. Up till then, the pressure had been slowly building up, but as I tried to run, it was like a rope snapped right around my ankles and was pulled back, sending me reeling to the floor. My face smacked against the hardwood, and I could feel my nose twist to the side. Blood quickly seeped out of my nostrils, tainting the glossy wood underneath. My adrenaline was flowing, and if not for the droplets of blood, I wouldn't have known I was bleeding. I couldn't feel the pain from my face bouncing off of the floor. Foregoing the use of my legs, I reached forward and tried to grab something strong to pull myself forward with. The voice said. There was a rattle to her voice now, like something was shaking in her throat, or they were uncertain how to maintain speech for long. My fingernails started to split as I did my best to dig them into the hardwood without managing to make any progress. Small screams vibrated my throat as I tried to call for help, knowing well enough that no one could hear me. The pressure around my ankles had gotten so severe that I couldn't manage to separate them. Something had wrapped around them, tying my legs together. I twisted my body, ready to scream at the individual manipulating me. I felt like a fish as my body contorted to allow me to lay on my back. The first thing I saw were my legs, and more importantly, what had bound them. It wasn't quite what I expected to see. A thick tuft of brown fibers that looked more like straw than hair circled out my ankles several times. The fibers were all moving in different directions, like they had individual muscles. Following the fur, I eventually caught sight of the thing that was sitting on my couch. The thing that had been whispering to me. Its body was nearly identical to what had been wrapped around my legs. A bundle was about 4 feet high of that twitching straw-like material. All the little sticks were moving around, causing a soft clicking whenever they hit each other. It was thicker near the base of it. The base is also where the thread came out that was wrapped around me. As it got to the top, the stack thinned out, like a tree. At the top, though, there was a small, dark space, where instead of straw, I could see within the darkness a glint of light, 2 dark, beady little eyes staring at me. The sticks began to rattle quicker than before, smacking up against each other until I heard. The thing wasn't talking via some voice box. It was replicating speech by hitting straws against each other. What happens if I say yes? I asked, unsure if the thing would even be able to hear me. I thought it might be unable to speak when it didn't respond for a very long minute. It replied, sticks hitting together. Like the others. I couldn't believe I was trying to hold a conversation with this thing. The pile of hair and straw on my couch. This thing that had been pulling me to the ground over and over again. There was no reply from the thing, but I could only assume I was on the money with my assumption. That whatever the thing was, it's responsible for the disappearances around my town. Possibly even outside of it. And if I say no? Foolishly, the words jumped from my mouth. I don't know why I asked. If I thought it was responsible for the missing cases, then surely it had a hand in the deaths. The thing started to shift, and I realized the stack was getting shorter. The tuft was wrapped around my ankle, and it started to extend upwards, spiraling to my knees. The pressure that had been reserved to just above my feet started reaching higher. I was used to the pain on my ankles. It was almost numb at that point, but as the straws climbed, the pain was enough to elicit howls from me that I didn't even know I could make. Animalistic cries filled my house as rabbit saliva pooled in my mouth. I was suddenly able to sympathize with toothpaste tubes as I felt my body being squeezed. I didn't know what my final answer had in store for me, but I had to get it out. I had to speak. The pain was so intense and nerve-rattling that my words barely formed. Before I knew it, I was crying. Yes, over and over again. The straw stopped climbing and returned to its original position around my ankles. I sighed, somehow finding relief in the situation. Looking at the creature again, I noticed a similar line of straw had appeared. This line hung down from the ceiling. The start, pulled by the new thread, started rising into the air. Its body passing through the ceiling unfettered, and so the straw around my ankles started to lift as well. There wasn't anything I could even grab onto as my body began to lift, pulled by the thing around my ankles. I lifted and passed through the ceiling just like it had. Up higher and higher, until my body raised out of my house. I could see the thing pulling us up, stretched high into the blue sky. There was nothing I could do. Like a fish being yanked out of the water, I watched as the objects below me got smaller and smaller. I turned to look around and saw several other lines of straws, some close enough that I could make out each fiber, some far enough away that they were just a dark line. At the end of each thread, a person is being pulled by their ankles. We all ascended into the air together. The higher we went, the more of them I saw. Dozens of us are rising. Craning my neck as much as I could, I looked at the blue sky above me. I could see as I rose higher, something beyond that blue vial. More straws, huge pike-like fibers above the Earth's atmosphere. They were like pillars in the sky, and on those pillars, I could see more people. All of them were impaled on the fibers through their stomachs. Higher and higher, more and more, I could see the hell I had accepted. Everyone impaled. They were still screaming, still alive. They were like fucking shish kebabs. I wonder if my tears felt like rain below. I could see the clump of straw above me, rattling, and somehow, through all the screaming, I was able to hear it. The room was dark, the smoke clouds wafting up to obscure the overheads that made the man's shiny face all the more noticeable. He was sweating heavily, stammering out the last few minutes of his set. As he told the crowd about an incident with his mother when he was 12, the audience, stoners and hipsters who had been drinking since noon, watched him like a bug under a microscope. They wanted to be interested in what they saw, but really they were just hoping he would burn up under the harsh overhead lights. At the end of the day, there's nothing better than watching a comedian crash spectacularly. I took a swig of my lukewarm beer and made notes in my notebook. I had been doing comedy for about a year, and doing comedy is like being in AA. The guys who have been doing it longer than you are always super smug about it, and they just tell you to keep working the program, no matter how much you hate it. In this case, the program was a 15-minute set. Randy, a 5-year vet of the stage, had found me doing stand-up at my college. He said I had some talent, but suggested that I work on a 15-minute set until I knew it backward and forwards. Once you know that set better than your own hand, then you can start adding new stuff. 6 months later, and I had been doing the same set for nearly 6 months without fail. I felt I knew it well, could have quoted it in my sleep, and I had tried to add some new material time and time again. The bits were snappy, the one-liners were delivered perfectly, and Randy had even said that some of my new stuff was good, though off script. I felt like my bits were topical without being inflammatory, and that my stories landed without being too long-winded. I wasn't ready for Comedy Central, but I was more than prepared for the little dive bars that seemed to be where I was still cutting my teeth. So why was I only receiving middling laughs? The guy on stage, I hadn't bothered to remember his name after I shook his hand, stumbled off the stage to some polite, if not strained applause. He flopped onto the couch next to me, wiping the sweat off of his forehead. Randy took the mic and started attempting to get the crowd excited for the next comedian. Randy was usually the MC at these events. His reputation made over half a decade of funny, and the crowd always seemed glad to see him. He was building me up, getting the crowd hyped for my set, and as he introduced me, I stood up to scattered applause and made my way to the stage. I mounted the stage, a beer in one hand and my notebook under my arm, and set up as the crowd murmured and coughed. I adjusted the mic, dropping it a little from Randy's 7-foot-tall height, and the crowd seemed to find some amusement in this act. As I looked out over the crowd, I could see many familiar faces sitting amongst the smoke and the smell of cheap beer. The audience was almost always the same barflies and regulars who came to hear the same jokes repeatedly. I was always happy to see them, and their tip money at the end of the night. But I remember wishing for some new blood amongst the spattering of drunks and stoners. Oh, how the gods mocked me with their answer. So, I'm pro-guns. Hold your booze. A few half-hearted boos came from the crowd as though in answer. Someone online asked me the other day if that meant I would shoot a home invader, which it does. But as a comedian who works for tips, I don't usually have anything worth stealing, so it's not usually a problem. Some scattered laughs. Well, they always follow it up by asking me, "What, don't you value human life more than things?" Well, I tell them, clearly he valued my things more than his life, so I must have nicer things than I thought. Some half-hearted laughs greeted the end of my joke, but they were perfunctory at best. The crowd came in as I set up my next joke. Have you heard about this new paper made of elephant dung? Yeah, I shit you not. They take the dung, clean it, press it, clean it again, I hope. Through a process known only to the paper's maker, they create an eco-friendly paper that's safe for the environment. The crowd shuffled in as I set up my punchline, and though I couldn't tell exactly how many there were, it looked like at least 20 that filled into the back of the room. I couldn't tell if they sat down or not. The room seemed to get darker as they filled the space. They didn't move closer. They didn't fill in the empty spaces left by the sparse crowd we had up front. And they just hovered near the back of the room in a cloud of strange silence. I paused a minute too long, realizing I was stretching my punchline out too long before continuing. It's like they say, isn't it? One elephant shit is another man's 50 Shades of Grey. The crowd actually laughed at that one. This joke was so ridiculous that it never failed to get laughs, but the group in the back burst into sudden and immediate laughter. The laughter was sudden and unexpected. I saw people in the front jump a little as the 20 or so people burst into spontaneous laughter very suddenly. I smiled a little, nodding and asking if they liked that joke or something, before continuing on with the next joke. The crowd of newcomers were definitely what we needed around here, and I rode the wave of their laughter into my next bit. You ever wonder why you never see any hipster necrophiliacs? The front row shook their heads, but the back continued to laugh mechanically. Because they'd have to fuck them before they got cool. The laughs from the front were more akin to groans as they accepted the corny joke, but the back of the house burst into the same mechanical laughter. I was energized. I was receiving what I thought was my due at long last. These people were eating up what I was putting down, and it tempted me to do something I had been working on but hadn't brought it out yet. So my mom called the other day, and the crowd in the back hasn't stopped laughing though. They buzzed with this sort of constant, canned laughter as the others died down and waited for the next joke. Some had turned to look at the crowd behind them, and I could see some of the other comedians looking at them with misgivings. Their laughter never changed, never rose or fell in volume, but kept chuckling out in that fake, sitcom laughter you always hear on Friends or How I Met Your Mother. She lives in a small town, 2 stoplights and Walmart, and they have a dog that's become sort of a... I was starting to lose my focus as the crowd kept laughing. They never tired and never stopped, and I could see one of the comedians getting up to go say something. The audience wasn't watching me anymore. They were all craned around in their seats, looking at the crowd that chuckled on and on. The comedian, Mark for sure I thought, walked towards the back. As he did, he was suddenly obscured by the smoky darkness that seemed unaffected by the murky overheads that flanked the stage. He stopped on the fringe, seeming to say something to them. He suddenly clapped his knees and began to bray the donkey laughter I'd heard from the couch on many occasions. He laughed long and hard, joining the throng as his brays were lost amongst their grating mirth. After a few seconds, his unique sound was lost amongst their glee. Town mascot, I continued, as I tried to power through it. It sleeps in the middle of the road. People feed it and leave it water. They drive it around and bring it inside at night and everyone knows who he is and why he's there. I was losing focus. I could see Randy approaching the stage, plugging in a mic so he could remind the crowd to keep it down and respect the comedians. And I hoped this was just some kind of prank. The laughter had been going on for nearly 2 minutes now, and it was becoming abrasive. I was no longer flattered. I was no longer heartened by the laughter. I was becoming creeped out, and if this was someone's idea of a joke, then it wasn't very funny. I heard the static when Randy's mic clipped in. Okay, people, let's remember to respect the comedians and keep our laughter to a respectable level, okay? The laughter continued uninterrupted. I stood on the raised stage, looking out into the inky darkness and watching the chuckling tide. They rumbled out their artificial laughter in the face of my confusion. Randy stood by the stage, eyes glaring at them, and when he sat the mic down, I could hear the reverb as it made an angry sound. He set off for the back of the house, not a long walk, and when he got to the throng of people, he started shouting at them to be quiet. Randy had come to the same conclusion I had. He thought this was a big joke, a flash mob, maybe even one set up by Mark, and he was not amused. I watched from the stage as his shouts became a confused chuckle. His chuckle became a guffaw, and then it was all over for poor Randy. He stumbled into the mob, grinning and laughing, and his laughs were soon consumed by the tide of laughter. That was when they started moving forward. The crowd was up now, scenting danger, but the group blocked the exit. They could do little but watch as the shuffling mass crept forward, seeming to float as they came, and swept slowly towards the crowd that had congregated close to the stage. Some drunk let fly with a pitcher of PBR, the pitcher spilling as it flew end over end. But if the crowd was slowed by the beer or the heavy glass vessel, they didn't show it. Another man charged them, meaty fists raised, but fell to his knees, laughing before connected with anything. The group rolled over him, and when they passed, he was no longer on the ground. The closer they got, the less I felt like I saw of them. As the front group began to chuckle, their knees shaking and their fists pounding their chests, the more my feet began driving me towards the back of the stage. The group was made up of human-shaped creatures. Their features were dark and undulating, their mouths laughing, white teeth smiling, as their eyeless faces bobbed with mirthless laughter. Those who were absorbed by them were never seen again. Those who were absorbed by them never stopped laughing. When my back smacked against the wall, I knew I was out of places to retreat. The fabric curtain that covered the wall felt soft under my sweaty hands, and it was only then that I realized I was still holding the mic. I let it drop, the feedback yarking angrily, but I hardly noticed amidst the din of emotionless laughter. The tone never rose, never fell, just remained as the same level of soulless noise as it drove ice picks into my skull. I closed my eyes, sinking to my backside, and covered my ears with my hands as the mask came up to the edge of the stage and attempted to mount it. When the overhead lights hit it, the mask recoiled, and the laughter sounded like tortured screams with a thin veneer of hilarity. It sounded like the laughter that comes creeping from the windows of an asylum. It sounded like the laughter one hears in hell. I closed my eyes and prepared to be consumed. I knew that I, too, would begin to laugh any minute. I would be helpless to resist. I would simply start to chuckle, start to guffaw, and before I knew it, I would be running to them. I would gladly join the throng of laughing fools if it meant an end to this hell. I was standing alone outside the joke, and even now in my terror, I longed to be a part of it. I don't know how long I sat there with my hands over my ears. 1 minute the world was a sea of robotic laughter, and the next, it was simply gone. I lifted my head to find the back room of the bar completely empty. The other 3 comedians, Mark, Randy, the audience, they were all gone. I was the only one left, the only one not laughing. And when I left the bar, the owner watched me go with some confusion. I never came back again. I knew I couldn't stand on that stage again, not after what I had seen. And I certainly couldn't tell jokes again, as I thought about the grinning audience of living darkness. Turns out, that was the first of many retreats that night. Over the next few weeks, I saw the audience again and again. They were in the grocery store as I checked out. They were outside the bus as I rode it to work, standing outside the bus stop and looking at me with their eyeless faces. At night, they were at the foot of my bed. I knew I had to leave. I packed up anything that mattered to me and got in my car and drove until I ran out of miles or ran out of money. Turns out, the money came first. I ran out of gas next to a little motel that needed a desk clerk. I've been handling that desk for the last 2 years. I'm pretty good at my job. I make the guests laugh. I'm always at work on time since I live on the premise. And I can eat anything I want from the hotel kitchen, as long as I don't go too crazy. I found friends in this little town. Not the same as those I had, but they're good people. They often tell me that I should be a comedian. I tell them that in another life I was. When I go to sleep, I get to live that other life and listen to the chuckling crowd as it drags itself closer and closer to my stage. I always wake up before they get me. I hope they never do.